The wind had teeth that winter. Real teeth, sharp enough to strip the bark off cottonwoods and turn a man's breath to ice before it left his lungs. Clara Whitmore stood at the schoolhouse window on the morning it all started to fall apart, watching the sky turn the color of an old bruise, and thought about her last 3 potatoes. 3 potatoes. That was what stood between her and asking for charity. She'd already sold her wedding ring to the traveling merchant 2 months back. Told herself it was practical, that Michael wouldn't have minded. The dead men didn't need gold and living women needed to eat. The merchant had given her $12 and a look that said he knew exactly how desperate she was. The money was gone now. Gone into firewood and lamp oil, and the dried beans she'd stretched so thin they were more like bean-flavored water than actual food. Miss Whitmore? Little Sarah McKenna was staring at her with those big, worried eyes that 8-year-old girls shouldn't have. Clara forced her face into something resembling calm and turned from the window. "Yes, sweetheart? Are you sick? You look pale." "I'm fine." The lie came easy now, smooth as river stones. "Just thinking about today's lesson. Now who can tell me what 7 times 8 equals?" The children bent over their slates, and Clara gripped the edge of her desk to keep herself steady. The room tilted slightly, then righted itself. Not enough food, not enough sleep, not enough of anything except pride, and pride wouldn't keep her alive much longer. Red Hollow, Montana Territory, wasn't the kind of place that forgave weakness. Population maybe 200 on a good day, scattered across a valley so remote that mail came twice a month if you were lucky. The town had 1 church, 1 general store, 1 saloon, and 1 schoolhouse that leaked when it rained and turned into an icebox when the temperature dropped. Clara had arrived 2 years ago with her husband, full of hope and plans and the kind of optimism that city people always brought to the frontier before the West knocked it out of them. Michael had been a dreamer. That was the kindest way to put it. He'd seen the advertisement in the Chicago papers. Opportunity in Montana Territory, rich land for the taking, and sold everything they owned to chase it. Never mind that he'd been a bookkeeper who'd never worked a day of physical labor in his life. Never mind that Clara had tried to tell him, gently, that maybe they should think it through. "It'll be an adventure," he'd said, eyes shining with that fever that men got when they believed they were about to become someone important. The adventure had lasted 6 months. Then a late spring blizzard, a bad fall from his horse, and pneumonia that set in so fast Clara barely had time to understand he was dying before he was gone. She'd buried him on a hillside overlooking the valley, and the town had watched her with the particular pity reserved for young widows stupid enough to follow their husbands into hell. She'd considered leaving, packing up, going back east, admitting defeat. But there was nothing back east except the same pitying looks and the knowledge that she'd failed. Besides, Red Hollow needed a teacher, and Clara needed a purpose more than she needed comfort. So she'd stayed. Taught the ranchers' kids their letters and numbers, lived in the tiny room attached to the schoolhouse, and pretended she wasn't slowly disappearing. "Miss Whitmore!" Tommy Reed's voice snapped her back. The boy was pointing toward the window, his face gone white. "Wolves!" Clara's heart dropped into her stomach. She moved to the window and felt the blood drain from her face. 6 of them. Maybe 7. Gray shapes padding through the snow, lean and hungry, circling the schoolhouse like they were taking inventory. The winter had been brutal enough to drive them down from the high country, desperate enough to make them bold. Everyone away from the windows. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Quietly now." The children scrambled back, and Clara's mind raced. The schoolhouse door was solid, at least. The windows too high for the wolves to reach. They had firewood. They could wait it out. Except they couldn't, because Clara had been rationing the firewood to make it last, and there were maybe 3 hours of fuel left before the cold became as dangerous as the wolves outside. "Miss Whitmore, I'm scared." Sarah again, tears tracking down her cheeks. "It's all right." Clara knelt beside her, even though her legs felt like water. "We're safe in here. They can't get through the door." But what if they don't leave? What if they don't leave? That was the question, wasn't it? Clara stood, squared her shoulders, and tried to think. Most of the children lived within a mile or 2, but in this cold with wolves prowling, no one was going anywhere. They'd have to wait for parents to come looking, which meant waiting until dark at least, and by then... The room spun. Clara grabbed for the desk and missed, her knees hitting the wooden floor hard enough to send pain shooting up her legs. She heard the children cry out, felt small hands on her arms, but the darkness at the edge of her vision was spreading like spilled ink. Not now, not now, not... Somewhere far away she heard hoofbeats. Then nothing at all. Clara woke to warmth and the smell of leather and snow. She was moving, no, being carried. Strong arms held her against a chest that felt like sun-warmed stone, and for a confused moment she thought Michael had come back, that the last 2 years had been nothing but a fever dream. Then a voice rumbled above her head, low and rough. "Stop wiggling, woman, or I'll drop you in a snowbank." Not Michael. Michael had never sounded like that, like gravel and whiskey and something dangerous. Clara's eyes snapped open and met Silas Boone's face 6 inches from her own. She jerked back instinctively, and he tightened his grip with an annoyed grunt. "I said stop wiggling." "Put me down!" "No!" They were moving through the snow toward a horse the size of a small mountain. Behind them, Clara could see the schoolhouse, smoke rising from its chimney, and a crowd of parents collecting their children. No wolves in sight. "The children are fine. I sent them home with their folks. Now shut up and let me get you somewhere warm before you freeze to death out of sheer stubbornness." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his help, didn't need anyone's help, that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. But her head was pounding, and her vision kept going gray at the edges, and the warmth of his body was doing something to her that felt dangerously close to surrender. Silas Boone was not a man you surrendered to lightly. Everyone in Red Hollow knew the stories. How he'd come to the territory 15 years ago with nothing but a rifle and a mean streak. How he'd built an empire out of cattle and sweat and a willingness to do things other men wouldn't. How his wife had died 5 years back under circumstances nobody talked about, but everyone whispered about when they thought he couldn't hear. He owned half the valley now, ran his cattle across land that stretched from the mountains to the river, employed 30 men who feared him more than they respected him, and rode through town like he was daring someone to challenge him. Clara had avoided him successfully for 2 years, had seen him exactly 3 times, always at a distance, always from behind the safety of the schoolhouse window. She'd heard the other women talk about him in church, voices low and scandalized. Dangerous. Heartless. Not the kind of man a decent woman should be alone with. And now here she was, being carried through the snow in his arms like a sack of flour. "Where are you taking me?" "My ranch." "Absolutely not." "You got a better option." Clara opened her mouth and closed it again. The truth was, she didn't. The room attached to the schoolhouse was barely warmer than outside, and she'd already burned through most of her firewood. She had no food except those 3 damn potatoes. No money, no family within 1,000 miles. No options except this one. "I'll pay you back," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Silas glanced down at her, and for just a moment something flickered in his eyes that might have been amusement or pity. She couldn't tell which was worse. "Sure you will." He lifted her onto the horse with surprising gentleness, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to grip the reins, caging her in warmth, and Clara told herself the shiver that ran through her was just from the cold. They rode in silence. The snow had started again, fat flakes that caught in Clara's eyelashes and melted against her cheeks. The world was nothing but white and gray, and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves, and Clara felt herself starting to drift. "Stay awake," Silas's voice was sharp. "You fall asleep in this cold, and you might not wake up." "I'm fine." "You passed out in a schoolhouse full of children with wolves at the door. You're not fine. You're half-starved and running on stubbornness, and if I hadn't shown up when I did, you'd be frozen on that floor right now." The words hit like fists. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "I don't need your judgment." "Not judging, stating facts." He paused. "How long since you ate a real meal?" "That's none of your concern." "It is now." They crested a ridge, and Clara saw the ranch spread out below them. It was bigger than she'd expected. A sprawling main house built from logs and stone, barns and outbuildings clustered around it like chicks around a hen, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Fences stretched as far as she could see, and even in the snow she could make out cattle, dark shapes moving slowly through the white. This was what power looked like on the frontier. Not fancy clothes or polite manners, but land and animals and the kind of wealth that meant you didn't have to ask anyone for anything. Silas rode straight to the main house and dismounted, then pulled Clara down before she could protest. Her legs buckled the moment her feet hit the ground, and he caught her with another one of those annoyed grunts. For the love of, he scooped her up again. You're worse than a newborn calf. I can walk. Like hell you can. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, and Clara got a confused impression of warmth and light and space before he was setting her down on a chair near the biggest fireplace she'd ever seen. Heat rolled over her in waves, and she couldn't stop the moan that escaped her throat. When did you last eat? Silas was already moving toward what looked like a kitchen area. And don't lie to me. Clara watched him, this big, rough man who moved around his kitchen with surprising efficiency, and felt something crack open inside her chest. 2 days, she whispered. Real food, I mean. I had some beans yesterday. He stopped, his back to her, and she saw his shoulders tense. 2 days. I was making it last. I had a plan. Your plan was to starve to death quietly so no one in town had to feel bad about it? He turned, and the anger in his face made her flinch. That's the stupidest goddamn thing I've ever heard. I don't need your charity. Good, because I'm not offering charity. He set a pot on the stove with more force than necessary. I'm offering you a job. Clara stared at him. What? You're a teacher. I've got 10 kids on this ranch whose folks work for me, and not one of them can read worth a damn. You teach them, I feed you, and put a roof over your head until spring, then we're even. It was practical, sensible even, a solution that gave her food and safety without requiring her to give up her pride. So why did it feel like stepping off a cliff? The town will talk, she said slowly. The town's already talking. Widow woman living alone, turning down help, wasting away like some kind of tragic heroine in a dime novel. His mouth twisted. At least this way, you'll be alive when they run out of things to say. Why do you care? The question came out sharper than she'd intended, and Silas went very still. He stood there for a long moment, backlit by the fire, and Clara saw something move across his face too fast to name. I don't, he said finally. But I've got kids on this property who need teaching, and you're the only teacher in 50 miles who's desperate enough to take the job. Seems like a practical arrangement to me. It was a lie. Clara could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. But she was too tired and hungry and desperate to call him on it. 1 winter, she said. Until spring, then I go back to the schoolhouse. Fine. And I'll pay you back. Somehow. Sure you will. He ladled something into a bowl and set it in front of her. Stew, thick with meat and vegetables and potatoes that made her mouth water. Now eat before you pass out again, and I have to carry you up the stairs. You're heavier than you look. Clara picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a bite. The flavor exploded across her tongue, rich and savory and real, and she had to close her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. She hadn't realized how close to the edge she'd been until someone pulled her back. The room Silas showed her to an hour later was on the 2nd floor, with a window that looked out over the valley and a bed that felt like heaven compared to the thin pallet in her schoolhouse room. There was a stove in the corner, already crackling with heat, and blankets piled so high she could have gotten lost in them. There's clothes in the wardrobe, Silas said from the doorway. Might be too big, but they're warm. Bathroom's at the end of the hall. I'll have breakfast ready at 6. Clara turned to thank him and found him already leaving, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. She stood there for a moment, listening to the silence of the house settle around her, and tried to understand what had just happened. She'd been rescued. That was the simple version. But nothing with Silas Boone was ever simple. She woke before dawn to the sound of men's voices outside. Through her window, she could see them gathering near the barn, ranch hands preparing for another day of work, their breath fogging in the cold air. Silas was among them, unmistakable even at a distance, and Clara watched as he spoke to them with sharp gestures that left no room for argument. The clothes in the wardrobe were men's clothes, but there was a woman's robe that fit well enough. Clara pulled it on and made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and bacon. The kitchen was empty, but there was food on the table, more food than she'd seen in months. Clara sat and ate slowly, forcing herself not to rush, remembering what happened when a starving person ate too fast. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, and she drank 3 cups before the door opened and Silas came in with a blast of cold air. "You're up." He stamped snow off his boots. "Good. The kids will be here in an hour." "Here? Where else? You think I'm sending them through this weather to some other building?" He poured himself coffee. "There's a room off the east wing that'll work. Used to be a parlor before my wife died. Nobody uses it now." The mention of his wife sat between them like a third presence. Clara had heard the stories. Everyone had. Maria Boone had been beautiful, young, full of life. Then she'd gotten sick or sad or something, and one day they'd found her in the barn with a rope around her neck. Or at least that's what people said. Silas had never confirmed or denied it, and anyone brave enough to ask didn't ask twice. "I'm sorry," Clara said quietly. "About your wife." Silas's jaw tightened. "That was 5 years ago. Still." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt pinned by the weight of his gaze. There was something in his eyes she couldn't name, grief, maybe, or anger, or both twisted together until they were indistinguishable. "The kids," he said finally. "They're rough. Ranch kids, most of them never been further than town. They'll test you. I can handle children. These aren't town children. These are kids who've seen their fathers break horses and brand cattle and put down sick animals. They don't have patience for soft teachers who think a pretty word will fix everything." Clara set her cup down carefully. "Mr. Boone, I may be hungry and desperate, but I'm not soft. I've been teaching in Red Hollow for 2 years, which means I've dealt with boys who thought I'd run crying at the first frog in my desk drawer, and girls who decided I wasn't worth listening to because I'm not from here. I'm still standing. Your ranch kids will be fine." A smile ghosted across Silas's face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "All right then, rooms down that hall. I'll send them in when they arrive." He left, and Clara finished her coffee in the sudden silence. Through the window, she could see the sun starting to rise, turning the snow pink and gold. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, the kind of beauty that could kill you if you weren't careful. She thought about the schoolhouse back in town, cold and empty now. Thought about her room with its thin walls and drafty window. Thought about those 3 potatoes she'd been planning to stretch into a week of meals. She'd traded one kind of survival for another. That was all. Nothing more complicated than that. The lie felt almost convincing. The children arrived in a group, shepherded by a woman with tired eyes and flour on her apron who introduced herself as Mrs. Chen, the ranch cook. There were 10 of them, ranging from maybe 5 years old to 14, all staring at Clara like she was a strange species of animal. "This is Miss Whitmore," Mrs. Chen said. "She's going to be teaching you, so you mind your manners and do what she says. Anyone gives her trouble answers to Mr. Boone, understood?" The children nodded in unison, and Mrs. Chen left with a sympathetic look that said good luck. Clara faced her new students and felt the familiar flutter of nerves she always got on the first day. These kids were different from the town children. Rougher clothes, harder eyes, the kind of watchful wariness that came from growing up in a place where weakness got you hurt. "All right," she said, "let's start with names." The oldest boy, tall and rangy with his father's Spanish features, crossed his arms. "Why should we tell you our names? You're just going to leave come spring anyway." "Maybe. But until then, I'd prefer not to call you Hey You for 3 months." Clara pulled out a chair and sat, making herself level with them. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I'm from Chicago originally, though that probably seems like another planet to you. I've been teaching in Red Hollow for 2 years, which means I've survived 2 Montana winters, and that makes me either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which yet." A small girl with pigtails giggled, and Clara saw the oldest boy's expression soften slightly. "I'm Diego," he said finally. "This is my sister Anna, and that's Tommy and Sarah. Wait, you're the teacher from town." "I am. My cousin goes to your school, said you're all right, said you don't hit kids for getting things wrong." Clara felt something twist in her chest. "No, I don't hit children. Learning is hard enough without adding fear to it." Diego nodded slowly, then looked at the others. "She's all right. Mr. Boone wouldn't have brought her here if she wasn't." The tension in the room broke like ice cracking on a river. The children found seats, still wary but no longer hostile, and Clara began the work of figuring out what they knew and what they needed to learn. It was familiar work, comfortable even. The kind of work that made Clara remember why she'd become a teacher in the first place, Not for the glory or the money, but because there was something deeply satisfying about watching understanding dawn in a child's eyes. By midday, she'd assessed their levels and started planning lessons. The youngest ones needed basic letters and numbers. The older ones could read, but their writing was rough and their arithmetic shaky. Diego, she suspected, was smarter than he let on, hiding his intelligence behind a tough kid act that probably served him well on a ranch. They broke for lunch, and Clara found herself alone in the room while the children ran off to eat with their families. She stood at the window, watching them chase each other through the snow, and felt a strange pang of something that might have been longing. She'd wanted children once, had imagined teaching her own sons and daughters, filling a house with noise and laughter and life. But Michael had died before they'd had the chance, and after that the idea of starting over with someone else had seemed impossible. They're good kids. Clara jumped and turned to find Silas in the doorway, watching her with that unreadable expression he seemed to wear like armor. They are, she agreed. Smart, too. Diego especially. His father works breaking horses. Dangerous work. Silas moved into the room, and Clara was suddenly aware of how small the space felt with him in it. Kid's seen his share of bad accidents, makes him careful. Is that why you wanted them to have education? So they'd have choices besides ranch work? Silas shrugged. My father couldn't read. Signed his name with an X his whole life. Made him dependent on people who could read, and some of them cheated him because of it. His voice went flat. I won't have kids on my property grow up that helpless. It was the most he'd said about himself since she'd arrived, and Clara found herself curious despite her better judgment. How did you learn to read? My wife taught me. The words came out hard, like he was pulling them from somewhere deep. Took her 2 years, and I fought her every step of the way. Too proud to admit I needed help. Too stupid to see she was trying to save me from my own ignorance. Clara thought about pride, about stubbornness, about refusing help even when you were drowning. I understand that, she said quietly. Silas looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt something pass between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The knowledge that they were both people who'd rather break than bend. Lunch is ready, he said finally. Mrs. Chen made enough to feed an army. He left, and Clara stood there for a long moment before following. The house was big enough that she could hear voices from several directions. Ranch hands in the bunkhouse, children playing outside, the cook humming in the kitchen. It was full of life in a way her schoolhouse had never been. She tried not to think about how much she liked it. Object. The days fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, eat the breakfast Silas left for her, teach the children until mid-afternoon. In the evenings, she'd help Mrs. Chen with dinner preparation, partly to be useful and partly because sitting alone in her room made her feel like a prisoner despite the comfort. Silas was often absent, off checking fences, dealing with cattle, managing the 100 small crises that came with running a ranch this size. But sometimes he'd appear in the doorway of the schoolroom, silent and watchful, and Clara would feel her skin prickle with awareness. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it didn't mean anything, that she was just lonely and grateful and confused. But late at night, lying in a bed that was too warm and too soft, she'd think about the way he'd carried her through the snow, the surprising gentleness in his rough hands, the flash of something vulnerable in his eyes when he mentioned his wife. It was dangerous, these thoughts. Clara Whitmore was a widow who needed to get through the winter and go back to her life. Silas Boone was a hard man with a dark past who'd offered her shelter out of practicality, nothing more. She repeated this to herself like a prayer. It didn't help. 3 weeks into her stay, a blizzard hit that made all the previous storms look like light dustings. The wind howled like a living thing, piling snow against the buildings until the ranch felt like a ship lost at sea. No one could go anywhere. The ranch hands huddled in the bunkhouse, the animals in the barns, and Clara found herself trapped in the main house with Silas and Mrs. Chen. The cook left after dinner to check on her husband in the bunkhouse, promising to return in the morning if the storm let up. And then it was just Clara and Silas, alone in a house that suddenly felt very small. They sat in the main room, fire crackling between them, and Clara tried to read a book she'd found on the shelf. But the words kept blurring, and she was too aware of Silas sitting across from her, sharpening his knife with long, steady strokes that should not have been as fascinating as they were. Stop fidgeting, he said without looking up. I'm not fidgeting. You've read the same page 4 times. Clara snapped the book shut. Maybe I'm a slow reader. You're not. He tested the blade against his thumb. You're nervous. I'm not nervous. You've been nervous since you got here, like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. He finally looked at her, and the firelight caught in his eyes, turning them amber. You think I'm going to demand payment for all this? Claire's cheeks burned. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Every woman in Red Hollow thinks I'm one step away from dragging some poor girl into my den like a wolf. His mouth twisted. Maybe they're right. I don't think that. No? He set the knife aside. Then why do you look at me like I might bite? Because I'm afraid you might, Clara thought, but didn't say. Because I'm afraid I might let you. I'm grateful, she said instead, for everything you've done. I just don't understand why. I told you why. You told me you needed a teacher. But there are other teachers, cheaper ones who wouldn't come with all the gossip and complication I bring. Silas stood, and Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. He moved to the window, staring out at the wall of white beyond the glass. My wife was like you, he said quietly. Proud, stubborn, would rather die than ask for help. He pressed one hand against the window frame. When she started getting sad, pulling away, I told myself she'd snap out of it. That she just needed time. I didn't push because I thought pushing would make it worse. Clara's throat closed. Silas found her on a Tuesday morning. She'd gone out to the barn during the night, and I didn't even know she was gone until the hand started screaming. His voice had gone flat, empty. So when I saw you standing in that schoolhouse, half dead from stubbornness, I thought, not again. Not if I can stop it. The silence after his words felt heavy enough to crush them both. Clara stood slowly and crossed to him. She wanted to touch him, to offer comfort, but she didn't know if she had the right. So she stood beside him instead, close enough that their arms almost touched, and looked out at the storm. It wasn't your fault, she said. Wasn't it? No. Depression it's like drowning on dry land. You can't see it from the outside, can't always help even when you do see it. And sometimes people are just determined to go down, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. Silas turned to look at her, and Clara saw something raw and bleeding in his expression. You talk like you know. My mother. The words came out before she could stop them. When I was 12. Same thing. I found her. She took a shaky breath. I spent years thinking I should have seen it coming, should have done something, but the truth is, she'd been drowning for years, and all of us missed it because she was so good at hiding. They stood there, 2 people carrying the same weight, and Clara felt something shift between them. Not attraction, exactly, though that was there too. Something deeper. Recognition. I'm sorry, Silas said finally. Me too. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, and Clara let herself stand close to this dangerous man who'd saved her life, and thought, I'm in trouble. Voltex. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. Mrs. Chen returned with news that 2 of the barns had lost shingles and would need repairs. Silas left immediately to deal with it, and Clara tried not to notice how empty the house felt without him. The children arrived for lessons, and Clara threw herself into teaching with more energy than strictly necessary. Diego asked about Chicago, and she told them stories about streets full of people and buildings so tall they blocked out the sky. The younger children listened with wide eyes, and Clara realized how small their world was, how limited. Could we go there? Anna asked. To Chicago? You could, Clara said, if you learn enough, work hard enough, save enough money. The world is bigger than this valley, and education is what lets you see it. Diego looked skeptical. Mr. Boone never left Montana. Mr. Boone chose to stay. That's different than having no choice. Clara leaned forward. That's what I'm trying to give you. Not the order to leave, but the ability to choose. Something sparked in Diego's eyes, understanding maybe, or hope. Clara made a note to find him harder material, things that would challenge that sharp mind hiding behind his careful facade. That evening, she was helping Mrs. Chen with dinner when Silas came in covered in snow and looking exhausted. He'd been out since dawn, fixing barn roofs in sub-zero temperatures, and Clara felt a spike of concern she tried to ignore. "Sit," she said, pointing to a chair. "You look half frozen." "I'm fine." "You look like death." "Sit before you fall over and I have to drag you to bed." Mrs. Chen snorted into her pot, and Silas shot Clara a look that might have been amusement. But he sat, and Clara poured him coffee with hands that shook slightly. This was getting out of control. These feelings, this concern, this awareness that made her skin feel too tight. She was supposed to be here for the winter, nothing more. Not getting tangled up in Silas Boone's life, not caring if he worked himself to exhaustion, not noticing the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. "We need to talk," Silas said suddenly. Clara's heart stopped. "About what?" "The town. They're sending someone out tomorrow to check on you. Make sure you're all right, that I haven't done anything." He trailed off, jaw tight. "Scandalous?" "Something like that." Clara set the coffee pot down carefully. "And what do you want me to tell them?" "The truth. That you're teaching the ranch kids, earning your keep, and that nothing improper is happening under my roof." He met her eyes. "But they won't believe it. They'll assume the worst because that's what people do." "I don't care what they think." "You should. You're going back to that town in spring. You'll have to live with whatever reputation I give you." The words hit harder than they should have. Clara turned away, busying herself with cutting vegetables she didn't need to cut. "I made my choice when I came here," she said. "I'll deal with the consequences." "Clara, I'm fine, Mr. Boone. I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of handling small-town gossip." She heard him stand, felt him move closer. "You're a terrible liar. And you're too protective of someone you barely know." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, defensive, and Silas went still. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "You're right, it's not my business." He grabbed his coat. "I'll be in the barn if anyone needs me." The door closed behind him with more force than necessary, and Mrs. Chen sighed. "That man," she said, shaking her head, "stubborn as a mule and twice as difficult." Clara stared at the door, feeling like she'd just made a terrible mistake, but not sure what else she could have said. "I don't understand him," she admitted quietly. "Don't need to understand him, just need to see him." Mrs. Chen tasted the soup, adjusted the salt. "He's been alone in this house for 5 years, miss, alone with his grief and his guilt and all those ghosts. Then you show up, and suddenly he's got someone to care about again, and it's scaring him to death. He doesn't care about me, he's just being practical." Mrs. Chen gave her a look that said exactly what she thought of that statement. "Keep telling yourself that, honey. Maybe eventually you'll believe it." Tets. The visitor from town arrived the next afternoon, Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, who managed to convey disapproval through her very posture. She insisted on speaking to Clara alone, and they sat in the parlor-turned-schoolroom while Mrs. Patterson's eyes catalogued every detail. "We've been concerned," she said, mouth pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. "You living out here, with Mr. Boone, with no chaperone." "Mrs. Chen lives here," Clara said evenly. "Mrs. Chen is married and lives in the bunkhouse with her husband. You're alone in this house with a man who has," she paused delicately, "a reputation. I'm teaching the ranch children. It's a job, nothing more." "A job that requires you to live under his roof? My dear, surely you can see how this looks." Clara felt her temper rising. "Mrs. Patterson, when you found me collapsed in the schoolhouse 3 weeks ago—" "Oh, wait, you didn't find me. You weren't there when the wolves were circling and the children were screaming. Mr. Boone was. He saved my life and gave me honest work. If that scandalizes you, I suggest you examine your priorities." Mrs. Patterson's face went red. "Miss Whitmore, I am trying to help you. If you continue on this path, your reputation will be ruined. No decent family will want you teaching their children. Then I'll teach indecent families." Clara stood. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm fine. You can tell the town I'm surviving the winter, teaching children who desperately need it, and that Mr. Boone has been nothing but professional. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lessons to prepare." She walked Mrs. Patterson to the door and watched her leave, spine rigid with outrage. Only when the wagon disappeared down the road did Clara allow herself to shake. She'd just destroyed her reputation. Whatever chance she'd had of returning to Red Hollow as the respectable widow teacher was gone now, burned away by her own temper and pride. "Well," Silas said from behind her, "that could have gone better." Clara jumped and turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. How much did you hear? All of it. These walls aren't as thick as you'd think. He studied her face. You didn't have to defend me. Yes, I did. Why? Because you saved my life. Because you gave me shelter when I had nothing. Because you're not the monster they think you are. Because it was the truth, she said instead. Silas pushed off the doorframe and moved closer, and Clara's breath caught. He stopped just inside her personal space, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. You just ruined yourself for me, he said quietly. You know that, right? I ruined myself by nearly starving to death in a schoolhouse. This is just the aftermath. Clara Don't. She stepped back, needing distance. Don't apologize. Don't tell me I made a mistake. Don't try to fix this. I made my choice. I'll live with it. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, and Clara felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them both. Then Silas nodded once and walked away, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the knowledge that she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The days grew shorter. Christmas came and went with a quiet celebration. Presents for the children, a feast prepared by Mrs. Chen, carols sung around the fire. Clara watched Silas with the children and saw a different side of him, gentler, almost soft. He carved toys for the youngest ones, taught Diego to play chess, and told stories about horses and storms and the early days of the ranch that had the kids hanging on every word. She fell a little bit more in love with him and hated herself for it. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? Love. Inconvenient, inappropriate, impossible love for a man who was still haunted by his dead wife, who'd saved her out of guilt rather than affection, who saw her as a responsibility rather than a person. Clara tried to bury it. Focused on teaching, on the children, on counting down the days until spring when she could leave and go back to her safe, lonely life. But it was there every time he looked at her, every time their hands brushed reaching for the same coffee pot, every time she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. January arrived with more storms. One afternoon, the wind was so fierce that Silas ordered everyone to stay inside. The children couldn't come for lessons, the ranch hands were confined to the bunkhouse, and Clara found herself trapped again with Silas in the big empty house. They played chess by the fire. Clara had learned the game from her father, and she was better than Silas expected. She took his queen with a bishop he hadn't seen coming, and he laughed, actually laughed, and the sound did something dangerous to her heart. Where did you learn to play like that? My father. He believed women should know how to think strategically, even if society didn't agree. Clara moved her rook. Check. Silas studied the board, then looked at her with something like respect. You're full of surprises, Clara Whitmore. Is that a problem? No. He moved his king. It's interesting. They played in comfortable silence for a while, and Clara let herself relax into it. This was nice, just being with someone, no expectations, no judgment. She'd forgotten what that felt like. Can I ask you something? Silas said suddenly. Of course. Why didn't you go back east after your husband died? Clara moved a pawn, buying herself time to think. Because going back felt like admitting I'd failed. And because there was nothing back there for me except people who'd say, I told you so, with their eyes, even if they were too polite to say it out loud. Pride. Stubbornness, she corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Pride is thinking you're better than you are. Stubbornness is refusing to quit, even when quitting makes sense. Clara captured his bishop. I'm stubborn. So am I. I noticed. They smiled at each other, and Clara felt the air between them shift into something warmer, more dangerous. Silas's eyes dropped to her mouth, and her breath hitched. Silas! The door burst open with a crash, and they both jumped. Diego stood there, snow-covered and panting. Mr. Boone, you need to come. The wolves are back, and they've got Tommy cornered in the south pasture. Everything happened fast after that. Silas was on his feet, grabbing his rifle, shouting orders. Clara followed, her heart in her throat, and heard Mrs. Chen screaming for someone to get the horses. Stay here, Silas ordered, but Clara was already pulling on her coat. Like hell. He didn't have time to argue. They rode out into the storm. Silas, Diego, three ranch hands, and Clara clinging to the back of Silas's horse. The wind was so fierce it felt like knives, and Clara couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. But she could hear the wolves growling, snarling, the sounds of animals gone mad with hunger. They found Tommy backed against a fence, blood on his coat, 4 wolves circling. He was holding them off with a stick, but it was only a matter of time. Silas fired once, twice, and 2 wolves went down. The others scattered but didn't run far. They were too hungry, too desperate. They'd come back. "Get the boy," Silas said to Diego, then swung off the horse and handed the reins to Clara. "If anything happens, you ride back as fast as you can. Don't stop. Don't look back." Silas, but he was already moving toward the wolves, rifle up, putting himself between them and Tommy. Clara watched in horror as the largest wolf, a huge gray beast with eyes like ice, turned toward him. It happened so fast. The wolf lunged, Silas fired, but the animal was already on him, teeth flashing. Silas went down hard, and Clara heard herself screaming his name. The ranch hands were there in seconds, pulling the wolf off, but Clara could see blood, so much blood, on the snow. She slid off the horse and ran, falling to her knees beside Silas. "Don't you dare," she said, pressing her hands against the gashes on his arm, his shoulder. "Don't you dare die on me, Silas Boone." He looked up at her, face pale with pain, and something like wonder crossed his features. "You came after me." "Of course I came after you, you idiot." Tears were streaming down her face, freezing against her cheeks. "Someone has to keep you alive long enough to pay me for teaching your kids." He laughed, then winced, practical to the end. They got him back to the house, and Mrs. Chen took over, cleaning and bandaging while Clara hovered uselessly. The wounds were bad but not life-threatening, deep gashes that would scar but would heal. Tommy had gotten away with just bruises and terror. Clara sat beside Silas's bed that night, watching him sleep, and finally admitted what she'd been fighting for weeks. She loved him. Completely, terrifyingly, impossibly. And spring was coming, which meant she'd have to leave. The thought felt like another wolf bite, sharp and deep and bleeding. Silas healed slowly, which drove him half crazy. 3 days confined to bed while his arm and shoulder knitted themselves back together. 3 days of Mrs. Chen forcing bitter tea down his throat and Clara reading to him from books she'd found in the library because he couldn't hold them himself with only one good arm. "You don't have to stay," he said on the 4th morning, watching her settle into the chair beside his bed with another book. "I'm fine. You're bored and irritable, which is different than fine." Clara opened the book. "Now hush. This is a good part." She'd been reading him adventure stories, tales of sailors and explorers and men who faced impossible odds. Silas suspected she'd chosen them deliberately, something to keep his mind off the fact that he was trapped inside while his ranch ran without him. It was working, mostly, but what kept his attention wasn't the stories. It was watching Clara's face as she read, the way her voice changed for different characters, the small smile that played around her mouth when she reached a part she particularly liked. He was in serious trouble. "Clara," he said, interrupting a scene about a ship in a storm. She looked up, one finger marking her place. "Yes?" "Thank you. For this? For staying." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or pleasure. "You saved my life first. Consider this partial repayment." "I told you, you don't owe me anything." "I know." She closed the book carefully. "But maybe I want to. Did you consider that?" Before he could respond, Diego appeared in the doorway, looking anxious. "Miss Whitmore? My sister's sick. Ma says, can you come look at her?" Claire was on her feet immediately, teacher mode activated. "Of course. Is she feverish?" "Real hot. And coughing bad." She glanced at Silas. "I'll be back." "Go. I'm not going anywhere." She left with Diego, and Silas lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way she'd said, "Maybe I want to," like she was admitting something that scared her. He understood that feeling. Mrs. Chen came in an hour later with soup and news. "Little Anna's got a fever, but Miss Whitmore thinks it's just a winter cold. She's sitting with her now, reading stories." The cook set the bowl on the bedside table. "That woman's got a good heart." "I know." "You planning to do anything about it?" Silas looked at her sharply. "Excuse me? Mrs. Chen gave him the look she'd been giving him since he was 25 and newly married. The one that said she'd known him too long to be fooled by anything. Don't play stupid with me, boy. I've watched you watch her for 6 weeks now. Question is, what are you going to do when spring comes? She goes back to town. That was the agreement. Agreements can change. Not this one. Silas pushed himself up against the pillows, ignoring the pull in his shoulder. She's got a life in Red Hollow, a reputation to repair. Last thing she needs is to tie herself to a man like me. A man like you, Mrs. Chen repeated flatly. You mean a man who saved her life? Who gave her work when she was starving? Who just fought off wolves to protect a child? A man whose wife killed herself, Silas said, and the words came out harder than he'd intended. A man who missed every sign, every cry for help until it was too late. You think Clara deserves that? Mrs. Chen's expression softened. Mr. Silas, you can't keep punishing yourself for Maria. What happened to her? That was her choice, not yours. I should have seen it. Maybe, or maybe she hid it too well and you're not half as all-knowing as you think you are. She picked up his empty bowl from earlier. That girl down there reading to Anna, she sees you, the real you, and she's not running. Might want to ask yourself why. She left, and Silas lay there with her words echoing in his head. Clara saw him. She'd seen him angry and difficult and covered in wolf blood, and she'd still knelt in the snow crying over him like he mattered, like he was worth saving. The thought was terrifying. Clara returned at sunset, looking exhausted. Anna's sleeping. Fever broke about an hour ago. She'll be fine. You should rest. I should finish this chapter first. She sank into the chair and picked up the book. Unless you're tired of listening? No. The word came out rougher than he'd meant it. I like your voice. She blushed, actually blushed, and Silas felt something warm uncurl in his chest. When was the last time he'd made a woman blush? When was the last time he'd wanted to? Clara read until full dark, until Silas could barely keep his eyes open. When she finally closed the book, he caught her wrist before she could stand. Stay, he said, just for a minute. She froze, and he could see her pulse jumping in her throat. Silas, I know this is complicated, and you're leaving in spring, and I have no right to ask anything from you. He looked at their hands, his scarred and rough, hers small and soft. But these past weeks, having you here, it's been, I know, she whispered. For me, too. They sat like that for a long moment, connected by nothing but his hand on her wrist and everything they weren't saying. Then Clara gently pulled away and stood. Get some sleep. You need to heal. She left before he could say anything else, and Silas lay in the dark, wondering what the hell he was doing, wondering if there was any version of this story that didn't end in someone getting hurt. By the end of the week, Silas was back on his feet, though Mrs. Chen and Clara both scolded him for pushing too hard too fast. His shoulder ached in the cold and probably always would, but he could work, and work meant not thinking, which was exactly what he needed. Except Clara was everywhere, teaching the children in the morning, helping Mrs. Chen in the afternoon, reading by the fire in the evening. Every time Silas turned around, there she was, and every time he saw her, it got a little harder to remember why he was supposed to keep his distance. The children adored her. Even Diego, who'd started out suspicious and defensive, had become her devoted student. Silas would hear them sometimes, Clara's patient voice explaining grammar or mathematics, Diego's questions getting sharper and more complex as he realized she could actually answer them. I want to go to university, Diego told Silas one evening, apropos of nothing. They were in the barn checking on a mare who was close to foaling. Miss Whitmore says I'm smart enough. Silas looked at the boy who'd been born on this ranch, whose father broke horses and whose mother cleaned houses. University. The word seemed to belong to a different world. That's so. She says there are scholarships for students who can't afford tuition. Says I should start preparing now, learning everything I can. Diego looked at him with eyes that were both hopeful and terrified. Would you let me go? If I got accepted? Silas thought about his own father, who'd kept him working the ranch until he'd run away at 15 with nothing but anger and determination. Thought about all the doors that had been closed to him because he couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't prove he was anything but hired muscle. If you get accepted, he said slowly, I'll pay for it myself, the whole thing, books, tuition, room, and board. Diego's face transformed. You mean it? I don't say things I don't mean. The boy was gone in a flash, running to tell his mother, leaving Silas alone with the horses and the weight of what he'd just promised. It would cost him thousands of dollars he could use for fences or cattle or any number of practical things. But the look on Diego's face had been worth every penny. That was a good thing you just did. Silas turned to find Clara standing in the barn doorway, wrapped in one of his old coats that was 3 sizes too big for her. You heard that? I was coming to tell you dinner's ready. She moved closer, and in the lamplight she looked young and beautiful, and completely out of place in this rough barn. What you offered Diego, that's going to change his life. He's smart, shouldn't waste that on ranch work. Not everyone would see it that way. Most men would want to keep their best workers close. Silas shrugged. Most men are fools. She laughed, and the sound echoed in the rafters. The mare shifted in her stall, and Clara moved to her, running gentle hands over her swollen belly. How much longer? Few days, maybe. First foal, so she's nervous. Aren't we all? Clara's voice went soft. Nervous about what comes next. Silas knew she wasn't talking about the horse. Clara. It's February, she said, still looking at the mare. Spring's coming. I should start thinking about going back. The words hit like a fist to the gut. You don't have to. We had an agreement. Agreements can change. Now she did look at him, and there was something fierce and frightened in her eyes. Can they? What exactly are you offering, Silas? Because if you're asking me to stay on as your permanent teacher, I'll need to know salary expectations, and that's not what I'm offering. The air between them went electric. Clara's breath caught. Then what? Silas moved closer, giving her plenty of time to back away. She didn't. I'm saying I don't want you to leave. I'm saying these past 2 months have been... He struggled for words that weren't big enough. I sleep better knowing you're in this house. I eat better because you make Mrs. Chen laugh while you're cooking. I come home at the end of the day looking forward to whatever story you're going to read, whatever lesson you taught that you can't wait to tell me about. Silas. His name on her lips sounded like a prayer and a warning. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said quickly. I know I'm not. I know I come with too much history, too much damage. But stay anyway. Stay through summer, through next winter. Stay until you can't stand the sight of me or until you've saved enough to go somewhere better than Red Hollow. Just stay. Clara's eyes were bright with tears. You're asking me to ruin myself completely. I'm asking you to give us a chance to figure out what this is. I already know what this is. Her voice broke. I'm in love with you, you difficult, impossible man. I've been in love with you since you carried me through that blizzard arguing with me the whole way. And that terrifies me because loving you means losing you, eventually. Either to guilt over your wife, or to the town's judgment, or to whatever darkness lives in you that I can't fix. Silas's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. I love you too. The words hung in the cold barn air. Clara stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. What? I love you. It was easier the second time, and a relief to finally say it out loud. I tried not to, told myself you deserved better, that I was too broken, that I just hurt you the way I hurt Maria. But I love you anyway. You can't just... Clara pressed her hands to her face. You can't just say that and expect me to know what to do with it. I'm not expecting anything. I'm just telling you the truth. She dropped her hands and looked at him with red eyes and trembling lips. Your wife is gone, has been gone for 5 years, and I've been using her ghost as an excuse not to live. Silas took another step closer. But then you showed up, half dead from stubbornness, and suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just obligation. You made me remember what it feels like to want something besides survival. The town can go to hell. Let them talk. They've been talking about me for years anyway. I don't know how to do this, Clara whispered. I don't know how to love someone after Michael. After losing him and nearly losing myself. What if I'm not ready? What if I fail? Silas closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. Then we failed together. But at least we tried. He kissed her then, and Clara made a small sound against his mouth before kissing him back. It was hesitant at first, both of them out of practice and uncertain. But then Clara's hands came up to grip his coat, pulling him closer, and Silas felt something in his chest unlock. This. This was what he'd been missing. Not just touch, but connection. The feeling that someone else in the world understood the weight he carried and was willing to help him bear it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her forehead against his chest. "We're going to scandalize everyone," she said. "Good. They'll call me your mistress. Then marry me." She jerked back. "What?" Silas blinked, surprised at his own words, but once they were out, he realized he meant them. "Marry me. Not because of the scandal, not because you owe me anything, but because I love you and I want to wake up next to you for whatever years I have left." That's insane. We've only known each other 2 months. I knew Maria for 6 years before we married, and I didn't know her half as well as I know you. He caught her hand. "I know you take your coffee black with 2 sugars. I know you talk to yourself when you're working through a problem. I know you're terrified of failing, but too stubborn to quit. I know you read the endings of books first because you can't stand the suspense. I know you." Clara was crying openly now. "I take my coffee with 1 sugar, not 2. See, we have things to learn. That's what marriage is for." She laughed through her tears, and Silas felt hope unfurl in his chest like a spring flower breaking through snow. "This is crazy," she said. "Probably. The town will never accept it. Don't care. I don't even know if I believe in marriage anymore after your husband died and left you with nothing but grief and gambling debts," Silas said quietly. "Yeah, I know about that." Clara went very still. "How?" "Found the letters in your room when I was looking for extra blankets that first week. Letters from creditors threatening to take you to court." He watched her face carefully. "How much does he owe?" "Owed, past tense, and it doesn't matter." "How much, Clara?" She pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. $300, plus interest. I've been paying it off slowly, but the interest keeps adding up faster than I can manage." $300. For a teacher barely making $20 a month, it might as well have been $3,000. Silas did the math in his head. At her current rate, she'd be paying for years, decades maybe. "I'll take care of it." "No." "Clara." "No." She spun to face him. "I won't be one of those women who gets rescued by a rich man and spends the rest of her life feeling bought. I'll handle my own debts." "Even if it takes the rest of your life?" "Even then." Silas saw the steel in her spine, the pride that had nearly killed her, and loved her even more for it. "Fine. Then let's make a deal." She eyed him suspiciously. "What kind of deal?" "You marry me. I pay off your debts as a wedding gift, and you spend the rest of your life making me regret the proposal by being as difficult and stubborn as I know you can be." Despite everything, Clara smiled. "That's not a fair trade." "Probably not. I'm getting the better end of it." He held out his hand. "So what do you say? Will you marry me, Clara Whitmore, and give this valley something to really talk about?" She looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Silas could see the war playing out on her face, fear and hope, grief and possibility, everything she was and everything she might become. Then she took his hand. "Yes," she whispered, "but I'm keeping my own bank account." "Fair enough. And I'm still teaching. I won't be one of those wives who sits around doing nothing. Wouldn't dream of asking you to. And if this goes wrong, if we make each other miserable, I'm leaving and taking half your cattle." Silas laughed, pulled her close, and kissed her again. "Deal." The announcement caused exactly the uproar they'd expected. Mrs. Patterson showed up at the ranch 2 days later with half the church ladies in tow, looking like she was preparing for battle. "Miss Whitmore, we need to speak with you, alone." Clara, who'd been teaching the children when the invasion occurred, stood her ground. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Mr. Boone. He's going to be my husband." The words sent shockwaves through the group. One woman actually gasped. Mrs. Patterson's face went through several colors before settling on an alarming shade of red. "You cannot be serious." "Completely serious." Clara linked her arm through Silas's, and he felt absurdly proud of her. "We're getting married in 2 weeks. You're all invited, though I suspect most of you will decline." This is indecent," Mrs. Patterson sputtered. "You've been living under his roof for months, unchaperoned, and now you expect us to believe this is a respectable union?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," Clara said calmly. I'm simply informing you of my plans. Whether you approve or not is irrelevant. Silas watched her face off against these women who'd probably been making her life miserable since she arrived in Red Hollow, and felt something fierce and protective surge through him. If you're done harassing my fiancée, he said, his voice cold enough to freeze water, I suggest you leave my property. Now. Mrs. Patterson drew herself up. The church will not recognize this marriage. Then we'll get married by the territorial judge. I'm sure he'll be happy to do it for the right price. Silas moved forward slightly, and the women retreated in a cluster. Now get off my land before I have my men escort you. They left in a flurry of skirts and outraged whispers, and Clara sagged against him the moment their wagon was out of sight. Well, she said shakily, that was fun. You were magnificent. I was terrified. Didn't show. He tilted her chin up. You sure about this? Last chance to back out. Clara's eyes met his, clear and certain. I'm sure. Terrified, but sure. Good, because I already sent Diego to town to wire the judge. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur. Silas paid off Clara's debts with a check that made her cry, then immediately hired her as the official ranch teacher with a salary that made her cry again. Mrs. Chen threw herself into wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that suggested she'd been waiting years for Silas to find someone new. Never thought I'd see this day, she said, pinning up Clara's dress, a simple blue thing that had belonged to Mrs. Chen's daughter. Thought he'd die alone in this house, stubborn fool that he is. Clara looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 2 months ago, she'd been half-starved and hopeless. Now she was about to marry the most notorious man in the territory, and she'd never been more certain of anything in her life. Mrs. Chen, she said slowly, his first wife. What really happened? The older woman's hand stilled. You should ask him that. I'm asking you. Mrs. Chen sighed and sat on the bed. Maria was sick, in her head, in her heart. Started small, just sadness, the kind everyone gets sometimes. But it grew. She'd go days without speaking, weeks without leaving her room. Mr. Silas tried everything, doctors, medicine, taking her to San Francisco for better treatment. Nothing worked. And then? Then one morning he found her in the barn. She'd been dead for hours. Mrs. Chen's voice went soft. He blamed himself. Still does, though anyone with eyes could see it wasn't his fault. Some people just can't be saved, no matter how much you love them. Clara thought about her mother, about Michael, about all the people she'd loved and lost. Do you think he's ready to try again? I think he wouldn't have asked if he wasn't. Mrs. Chen stood and adjusted Clara's collar. And I think you're exactly the kind of stubborn the man needs. Someone who'll fight him when he needs fighting and stand beside him when he needs standing. Someone who won't break. The wedding took place on a Tuesday afternoon with snow falling soft and steady outside. Judge Morrison came out from town, brought his clerk as a witness, and performed a ceremony so quick and practical, it was almost funny. Do you, Silas Boone, take Clara Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Clara Whitmore, take Silas Boone to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara looked at this hard, difficult man who'd saved her life and then given her a reason to live it, and didn't hesitate. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, though for the love of, keep it brief. It's freezing out here. Silas kissed her thoroughly enough that the judge cleared his throat twice, and when they finally broke apart, Clara was blushing, and Silas was grinning like he'd just won a war. The ranch hands threw a party in the bunkhouse that night, music and dancing and more whiskey than was probably wise. Diego gave a speech that made Clara cry again, talking about how Miss Whitmore had shown him that the world was bigger than Red Hollow and that he could be part of it. Mrs. Chen roasted a pig. Someone produced a fiddle. The children ran around shrieking with sugar-fueled energy while their parents danced and laughed and celebrated this unlikely union. Clara stood watching it all, Silas's arm around her waist, and felt something settle in her chest. This was home now. This collection of rough men and tired women and children who deserved better than they'd been given. This was family. Happy? Silas murmured against her ear. Terrified, she admitted, but yes, happy. Good. He pulled her closer. Because you're stuck with me now. Later, much later, they escaped to the main house while the party continued outside. Silas carried her over the threshold like he was daring anyone to comment, and Clara laughed until she couldn't breathe. "Put me down, you ridiculous man." "Absolutely not. It's tradition." "Since when do you care about tradition?" "Since it gives me an excuse to carry you." He set her down in the bedroom, their bedroom now, and suddenly the air changed, went thick with possibility and nervousness. Clara had been married before. She knew what came next. But this felt different, new, like she was learning a language she'd thought she already spoke. Silas seemed to sense her hesitation. He cupped her face gently, searching her eyes. "We don't have to—" "I want to," Clara interrupted. "I'm just nervous. Terrified, actually." He smiled, soft and understanding. "Me too." "You're terrified?" "It's been 5 years, Clara, and you're not—" He stopped, struggling with words. "You're not her. This is different, new, and I don't want to mess it up." Clara felt her heart crack open a little wider. She took his hand and placed it over her heart, where he could feel it racing. "Then we'll figure it out together," she said, slowly. They did figure it out, with patience and laughter and a few awkward moments that would have been mortifying if they weren't so endearing. And when Silas finally fell asleep beside her, one arm thrown possessively across her waist, Clara lay awake watching the moonlight paint silver patterns on the walls and thought, I could get used to this. Marriage, as it turned out, was both easier and harder than Clara expected. Easier because Silas was surprisingly considerate. He made coffee before she woke, gave her space when she needed to think, listened when she talked about her day with the children. Harder because living with someone meant seeing all their rough edges, and both of them had plenty. They fought. Clara had a temper when pushed, and Silas was stubborn as a mule about ranch decisions. Their first real argument came 3 weeks into the marriage, over something ridiculous, whether to hire a new ranch hand or make do with the current crew. "We need more men," Silas said over dinner. "Spring's coming, and we'll have twice the work." "You need to pay your current men better," Clara countered. "Half of them are thinking about leaving for the mines because they can make more money." "How do you know that?" "Because I talk to their wives when I'm teaching their children. They tell me things." Silas's jaw tightened. "The ranch finances are my business, and the education and welfare of the families who work here are mine." Clara set down her fork. "You want to know why you're having trouble keeping good men? Because you treat them like tools instead of people. Pay them fairly, give them real investment in this place, and they'll stay." "That's not how ranching works." "Then maybe ranching should work differently." They glared at each other across the table, and Clara saw Mrs. Chen quietly slip out of the room. The silence stretched, taut as a rope under strain. "You don't know what you're talking about," Silas said finally. "Don't I? I've been here 3 months. I've watched you work yourself half to death because you don't trust anyone else to do things right. I've seen good men leave because they got better offers, and I've heard their wives crying because they can't afford medicine when their children get sick." Clara stood. "You want a wife who just smiles and keeps quiet? You married the wrong woman." She walked out, furious and shaking, and didn't come back until after dark. When she finally returned, she found Silas in his office with ledgers spread across the desk and an expression that might have been chagrin. "You're right," he said without looking up. "About the men. About me being a controlling bastard. About all of it." Clara stopped in the doorway, surprised. "What?" "I worked it out. If I trim some of the excess spending and adjust the profit margins, I can give everyone a 10% raise and still come out ahead." He finally looked at her. "And I'm instituting profit sharing. 5% of annual profits split among the men who've been here more than 2 years." "Silas, you were right. I was treating them like tools, like my father treated his workers, which is exactly what I swore I'd never do." He closed the ledger. "I don't like being wrong, but I like disappointing you even less." Clara crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her face against his back. "Thank you. For being a stubborn fool? For listening, for changing, for trusting me enough to tell you the truth." His hands came up to cover hers. "You're going to turn this ranch upside down, aren't you?" "Probably." "Good." They fell into a rhythm after that. Clara taught in the mornings, helped Mrs. Chen in the afternoons, and spent evenings with Silas discussing ranch business. He started asking her opinion on things, and she started understanding the delicate balance of running an operation this size. The children thrived. Diego was reading at a level that suggested he really might make it to university. Anna had discovered a talent for mathematics. Even the youngest ones were learning faster than Clara had dared hope. And slowly, carefully, the town began to soften. Not everyone, Mrs. Patterson would probably die disapproving, but some of the younger families started acknowledging Clara in church. A few wives even approached her after service, asking quiet questions about the ranch school, wondering if there might be room for their children too. "We can't take them all," Silas said when Clara brought it up. "We don't have the space." "Then we'll build more space." "Clara, think about it. A real school, big enough for every child in the valley. You have the land, the resources, the connections. We could create something that lasts beyond us." Silas looked at her like she'd suggested building a castle on the moon. "That would cost thousands. You were going to spend thousands on Diego's education. Why not spend it on dozens of children instead?" "Because—" He stopped, frowning. "I don't have a good answer for that." "Then say yes." He studied her face for a long moment, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. Wonder, maybe, or pride. "You know what? Why the hell not? Let's build a school." They broke ground in April, as soon as the snow melted enough to work. Silas hired carpenters and laborers, and Clara threw herself into planning with an enthusiasm that made her feel alive in ways she hadn't since Chicago. This was purpose. This was legacy. This was something that would outlast both of them. The town watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism as the building rose on Boone land, a real schoolhouse with proper windows and a wood stove and enough room for 50 students. Clara worked alongside the construction crew when she wasn't teaching, and Silas pretended to disapprove while secretly being proud of her for it. "You're supposed to be a lady," he said, watching her hammer nails with competence born of necessity. "I'm supposed to be useful. There's a difference. You'll hurt yourself." Says the man who fought wolves with his bare hands. He didn't have an answer for that. May brought the first real warmth, and with it a problem Clara had been dreading. Her cycle was late, then later, then absent entirely, accompanied by morning sickness that made teaching difficult and eating nearly impossible. She told Mrs. Chen first, who cried and hugged her and immediately started knitting tiny things. Then she told Silas one evening after dinner, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must hear it. "I'm pregnant." Silas froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "You're sure? 3 months late and sick every morning? I'm sure." He set the cup down carefully, and Clara watched emotions flicker across his face too fast to name. Fear, joy, terror, hope. "I can't—" He stopped, started again. "Maria got pregnant once. Lost it at 4 months. She never recovered from that, I think. It was the beginning of—" His voice cracked. "I can't lose you. Not you." Clara crossed to him and took his hands. They were shaking. "You won't lose me. I'm healthy, strong, stubborn as hell. This baby will be fine. I'll be fine." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to keep both of us alive." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to be parents, Silas. Terrifying, wonderful, completely unprepared parents." He pulled her into his lap and buried his face in her hair, and Clara felt him trembling. "I'm scared," he whispered. "Me too. But we'll figure it out together." They told the ranch that night, and the celebration rivaled their wedding. Mrs. Chen cried again. Diego looked horrified at the idea of babies, but congratulated them anyway. The ranch hands presented them with a hand-carved cradle that must have taken weeks to make. Clara stood in the middle of it all, Silas's arm around her waist, their child growing inside her, and thought, this is what happiness feels like. Terrifying and messy, and absolutely worth it. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing all at once. Clara still taught, though she had to sit more often than she liked, and occasionally had to dash outside when the smell of Diego's lunch turned her stomach. Silas became impossibly protective, hovering like she might shatter at any moment, until she finally snapped at him one morning in front of the entire breakfast table. "I'm pregnant, not dying. Stop treating me like I'm made of glass." "You fainted yesterday." "Because it was 90 degrees, and I was wearing too many layers. That's called being hot, not being fragile." Mrs. Chen hid a smile behind her coffee cup. The ranch hands suddenly found their eggs fascinating. Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but was smart enough to recognize when he was outnumbered. "Fine," he said, "but if you faint again, I'm carrying you back to bed and you're staying there. Try it and I'll divorce you." "Can't. I already paid off your debts." "Then I'll run up new ones out of spite." Someone laughed, and the tension broke. But Clara saw the fear in Silas's eyes and understood it. He'd lost his first wife and their unborn child. The ghosts in this house weren't just Maria's. They were the baby who never got to be born, the family that never got to exist. She softened. "I'll be careful. I promise. But you have to let me live." He nodded, jaw tight, and Clara knew this was the best she'd get. Fear didn't respond to logic, and Silas's fear was a living thing that had been growing for 5 years. The school construction continued through the summer. Clara watched it take shape from her classroom window, walls rising, roof beams going up, windows being installed. It was beautiful in its practicality, sturdy and well-built, the kind of place that would last generations. Judge Morrison came out in June to inspect the progress, and Clara saw him pull Silas aside for a conversation that lasted 20 minutes. When Silas came back, he looked oddly pleased. "What was that about?" "He wants to make this an official territorial school. Says if we meet certain standards, the territory will help fund a teacher's salary and provide books." Silas pulled her against his side. "Your little project is becoming something bigger." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Stupid pregnancy hormones made her cry at everything and pressed her face against his chest. "It's not my project, it's ours." "Yours," he corrected. "I just pay for things. You're the one making it real." But that wasn't true. Silas had thrown himself into the school with unexpected passion, working alongside the carpenters, making sure every detail was perfect. He'd ordered books from San Francisco, desks from Denver, a globe that must have cost half a month's profits. He wanted this to work almost as much as Clara did. They made a good team, Clara realized. He provided the resources and practical knowledge. She provided the vision and educational expertise, and together they were building something neither could have managed alone. July brought a heat wave that made Clara's pregnancy miserable. She was 5 months along now, belly starting to show, and the weight combined with the temperature left her exhausted and irritable. She snapped at the children, argued with Mrs. Chen about dinner preparations, and told Silas he was hovering again when he brought her water for the 3rd time in an hour. "I'm trying to help," he said, hurt flashing across his face. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm just—" Clara pressed her hands to her face. "I'm hot and tired and my back hurts, and I can't sleep because this baby kicks me all night. I'm not fit for human company right now." Silas set the water down and moved behind her, hands settling on her lower back with firm pressure. Clara moaned before she could stop herself. "Here? Yes. Oh, that's— Yes, exactly there." He worked the knots in her muscles with practiced efficiency, and Clara felt herself melting. When had he learned to do this? Had he done this for Maria? The thought brought a pang of something complicated, not quite jealousy, but an awareness of the life he'd lived before her, the wife he'd loved and lost. "Thank you," she said softly. "For rubbing your back? For being patient with me when I'm being impossible." His hand stilled. "You're not impossible. You're pregnant and uncomfortable and doing something incredibly hard. You're allowed to be cranky." Clara turned to face him, and the tenderness in his eyes made her chest ache. "I love you. I love you too." He kissed her forehead. "Even when you're threatening to divorce me at breakfast. Especially then." The baby kicked, hard enough that they both felt it, and Silas's face transformed. He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against her belly, and Clara watched this hard man turn soft with wonder. "Strong," he murmured. "Going to be a fighter." "Takes after both of us, then." He looked up at her, and Clara saw the fear still there beneath the wonder. She tangled her fingers in his hair and held him close, wishing she could promise him everything would be fine, knowing she couldn't. August brought trouble in the form of a letter from Chicago. Clara found it mixed in with the ranch mail, her maiden name written in handwriting she recognized immediately. Her sister Anne, who she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Her hand shook as she opened it. "Clara, Mother told me you married some rancher out west. I assume you're still alive, though you haven't bothered to write and tell us. I'm informing you that Father died last month. Heart attack. Quick, at least. The funeral was 2 weeks ago. Mother wanted me to tell you, though she's still angry you left without saying goodbye. I don't expect you to come back for any memorial. I'm sure you're too busy with your new life to bother with your old family. But I thought you should know. Anne. Clara read it twice, then a third time, each word landing like a small blow. Her father was dead. Had been dead for weeks, and she hadn't known, hadn't felt it, hadn't sensed any change in the world that would indicate the man who'd raised her was gone. Clara. She looked up to find Silas watching her from the doorway, concern written across his face. My father died. The words came out flat, emotionless. Last month. My sister just now bothered to tell me. Silas crossed the room and took the letter from her shaking hands. He read it quickly, and his expression darkened. This is how she tells you? With a letter full of guilt and anger? That's Anne. Always was good at making everything my fault. Clara pressed her hands to her belly, feeling the baby shift. I should feel something, shouldn't I? Sadness, grief, something? Should you? He was my father. Was he? Silas set the letter aside and took her hands. Because from what you've told me, he was a man who let your mother die without seeing what was happening, then judged you for leaving to build your own life. That's not much of a father. Clara felt tears start, hot and angry. I should have written, should have told them about the wedding, the baby, all of it. Now he's dead, and I can't fix it. There's nothing to fix. You lived your life, he lived his. That's how it works. But what if, her voice broke, what if our baby asks about my family someday? What do I say? That I cut them off because they made me feel small and wrong for wanting more than Chicago society could offer. Silas pulled her against his chest, and Clara felt his heart beating steady and strong beneath her ear. You tell our child the truth. That family is what you make it, not what you're born into. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're blood. Clara cried then, messy and hard, grieving not for her father, but for the relationship they'd never had, the understanding that would never come. Silas held her through it all, one hand stroking her hair, the other resting protectively on her belly. When she finally pulled back, eyes swollen and nose running, he handed her his handkerchief without comment. I'm a mess, she said. You're human. I got tears and snot all over your shirt. I'll survive. She laughed wetly and wiped her face. What did I do to deserve you? Nearly starved to death in a schoolhouse. Set the bar pretty low, honestly. Clara hit his arm, but she was smiling. This was what she'd needed. Not platitudes or false comfort, but honesty and humor, and the knowledge that someone saw her at her worst and stayed anyway. Should I write back? She asked. To Anne? Do you want to? Clara thought about it, really thought about it. Did she want to maintain a connection to people who'd made her feel like a failure for choosing her own path? Who'd let her leave without fighting to keep her? Who couldn't even tell her about her father's death without lacing it with guilt? No, she said finally. I don't think I do. Then don't. But keep the letter. Someday, when you're not raw from it, you might feel differently. She nodded and tucked the letter into her pocket. Then she straightened her spine, wiped the last of the tears away, and looked at the classroom full of children waiting for their afternoon lesson. All right, she said, back to work. Silas caught her hand before she could leave. Clara, you're a good teacher, a good wife, and you're going to be a good mother. Your father's inability to see that says everything about him and nothing about you. The words settled into her chest like warmth, and Clara kissed him once, quick and fierce, before heading back to teach children who actually wanted to learn. September brought the school's completion. They held an opening ceremony that the whole valley attended. Even some of the town families who'd been skeptical came to see what Silas Boone and his controversial wife had built. The building stood proud against the mountains, 2 stories of solid timber and stone with windows that caught the afternoon light and made the whole structure glow. Inside were rows of desks, shelves of books, maps on the walls, and a blackboard so large Clara had actually gasped when she first saw it. Judge Morrison gave a speech about education and progress. Silas said a few gruff words about investing in the future. And then Clara stood in front of the crowd, this woman who'd arrived half dead and desperate less than a year ago, and felt something shift, This school, she said, one hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked, isn't just about teaching children to read and write. It's about giving them choices, about showing them that the world is bigger than this valley and they have every right to be part of it. She saw Diego in the front row, eyes shining with the kind of hope that hadn't been there 9 months ago. Saw Anna holding her mother's hand, already planning what she'd learn in this new building. Saw all the children who deserved better than what they'd been given, and felt purpose settle into her bones. My husband and I built this together, she continued, glancing at Silas. But it belongs to all of you. To every family in this valley who wants their children to have opportunities they never had. The door is open. All you have to do is walk through it. The applause was tentative at first, then growing, and Clara saw Mrs. Patterson in the back looking like she'd bitten into something sour. But younger women were nodding, and several men were already approaching Silas to ask about enrollment. They'd done it. Against all odds and expectations, they'd actually done it. That evening, exhausted and exhilarated, Clara and Silas sat on their porch watching the sun set over the valley. The new school stood silhouetted against the orange sky, and Clara felt a satisfaction so deep it was almost painful. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For believing in this. In me. For taking a starving widow and giving her a reason to fight." Silas took her hand, threading their fingers together. "You gave me a reason to fight, too. I'd forgotten what that felt like." The baby kicked hard enough that they both felt it, and Clara laughed. "This one's going to be trouble." Takes after its mother. And its father. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear. Somewhere in the valley, a coyote howled. The night air smelled of pine and grass and the promise of autumn. "I'm scared," Silas admitted suddenly. "About the baby. About losing you the way I lost—" "I know." Clara squeezed his hand. "But fear doesn't change what's coming. We just have to face it together." "What if I'm not a good father?" "What if you are?" She turned to look at him. "What if you're exactly what this child needs? Someone who's been broken and healed, who understands that life is hard but worth fighting for?" Silas's jaw tightened, and Clara saw him wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke. "I never told you the whole truth about Maria." Clara's heart stuttered. "You don't have to—" "I do. Because this baby is coming, and I can't carry this anymore." He took a shaky breath. "Maria got pregnant 6 months after we married. We were so happy. Planned names, built a nursery, all of it. Then she lost the baby at 4 months, and something in her broke." Clara waited, sensing there was more. "She wanted to try again immediately. I said we should wait, give her time to heal. She said I didn't understand, that I couldn't understand because I wasn't the one who'd failed." His voice went rough. "We fought about it for months. She got more withdrawn, more distant. Started saying things like maybe she wasn't meant to be a mother. Maybe I'd be better off without her." "Silas, I thought it was grief. Thought time would fix it. But then one morning I found her in the barn, and I realized time wasn't going to fix anything. She'd been telling me for months what was happening, and I'd been too stupid or too scared to hear it." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it? I was her husband. I should have—" "Should have what? Read her mind? Fix something that was broken in ways neither of you understood?" Clara turned to face him fully. "Silas, I watched my mother fade for years. I was in the house, saw her every day, and I still didn't see what was coming. Depression is like that. It lies to the person who has it and hides from everyone else." "But what if—" He pressed his hands to his face. "What if this baby triggers something in you? What if you can't handle it, and I lose you too?" Clara took his hands and pulled them away from his face, forcing him to look at her. "Then we'll deal with it. We'll get help, we'll fight it together, and we won't let fear control our lives. But you can't live in that terror, Silas. It'll poison everything good we're trying to build." "I don't know how to let it go." "Neither do I. So we'll learn together." She placed his hand on her belly. "This baby deserves parents who are present, not trapped in the past. Can you do that? Can you try?" Silas's hand spread wide over her stomach, and Clara felt the baby kick against his palm. Something in his face softened, and when he spoke again, his voice was steadier. "Yeah, I can try." They sat like that until full dark, his hand on her belly, her head on his shoulder, both of them trying to believe that the future could be better than the past. October brought the first frost and a scare that sent Clara's heart into her throat. She was teaching when the cramping started, sharp, insistent pains that made her gasp and grab the desk for support. The children stared at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Diego," she managed, "get Mrs. Chen, now." The boy was gone in a flash, and Clara sank into her chair, one hand pressed to her belly. The baby was still moving. That was good. That meant. But the pain was getting worse, radiating from her back around to her stomach in waves that made her want to scream. Mrs. Chen arrived running, took one look at Clara's face, and started barking orders. "Someone get Mr. Boone. Anna, you're in charge of the children. Take them outside and keep them busy. Move." "Is the baby coming?" Clara gasped. "It's too early. 7 months. It's too—" "Hush now. Let's get you to the house." Mrs. Chen wrapped an arm around her waist and half carried her across the yard, and Clara tried not to think about Maria losing her baby at 4 months. Tried not to imagine what Silas would do if— No, she wouldn't think it. They got her to bed, and Mrs. Chen examined her with gentle efficiency. "You're not bleeding. That's good. Baby's still moving?" "Yes." "Position feels right. You might have just overdone it. How much water did you drink today?" Clara tried to remember. "I don't know. Not much." "That'll do it. Your body's working hard to grow that baby, and if you don't give it what it needs, it complains." Mrs. Chen stood and pointed at her sternly. "Bed rest for the next 2 days. Water every hour. No arguing. But the school can survive without you for 2 days. Now drink this." Clara drank the water Mrs. Chen shoved at her and tried not to cry with relief. Not labor, just dehydration and exhaustion. The baby was fine. Silas burst through the door 10 minutes later, wild-eyed and breathing hard. He'd clearly run the entire way from wherever he'd been working. "What happened? Is she—" "She's fine," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Baby's fine. She just needs rest and water. Now sit down before you have a heart attack and give me 2 patients to deal with." Silas ignored her and crossed to the bed, taking Clara's face in his hands. "You're all right?" "I'm all right. Just scared myself for a minute there." He pressed his forehead against hers and Clara felt him shaking. "Don't do that to me. Wasn't planning on it. I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought it was happening again." "I know, I'm sorry." She pulled him down to sit beside her. "But we're fine. The baby's fine. I just forgot to drink enough water like an idiot." "You're not an idiot." "I'm a little bit of an idiot." That got a wet laugh out of him, and the tension finally started to drain from his shoulders. Mrs. Chen left them alone, and Silas stretched out beside Clara on top of the covers, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "You won't." "You can't promise that." "No. But I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay." She laced her fingers through his. "This baby is going to be born healthy and loud and demanding, and we're going to be exhausted and overwhelmed and completely in over our heads. That's what's coming. Not tragedy, not loss, just normal, terrifying parenthood." Silas closed his eyes, and Clara watched the war playing out on his face. Fear and hope, grief and love, all tangled together until they were impossible to separate. "Okay," he said finally. "I believe you." Clara wasn't sure if he actually did, but she appreciated him saying it anyway. The next 2 months passed in a blur of preparation. The school opened officially with 15 students, not just ranch children anymore, but town kids whose parents had decided education was worth more than gossip. Clara hired a young woman named Margaret to help with teaching while she prepared for the baby's arrival. Margaret was 22, fresh from a teacher's college in Denver, and eager enough to make up for her inexperience. Clara liked her immediately, liked her sharp questions and genuine enthusiasm, and the way she didn't flinch when Diego argued about Shakespeare's historical accuracy. "You've built something remarkable here," Margaret said one afternoon, watching the students work through a mathematics problem. "I've never seen children this engaged." Clara felt a swell of pride. "They're hungry for it. Most of them never had access to real education before. They don't take it for granted. Unlike the rich children I taught in Denver who treated school like a prison sentence." Margaret laughed. "I'm glad I came here, even if my mother thinks I've lost my mind. Welcome to the club. Everyone thought I'd lost mine when I married Silas." And did you? Clara looked out the window to where Silas was working with some of the older boys, teaching them about horse care. He caught her watching and raised a hand in greeting, and Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. Probably, she admitted, but I've never been happier. November brought snow and the reality that Clara was entering her final month of pregnancy. She was huge now, uncomfortable and waddling, unable to sleep because every position hurt, and the baby seemed to think nighttime was perfect for acrobatics. Silas had become impossibly protective again, but this time Clara didn't fight it as hard. She was scared too, if she was honest with herself. Scared of the pain, scared of something going wrong, scared of becoming a mother when she barely felt like she knew how to be a wife. "What if I'm terrible at it?" she asked Mrs. Chen one evening while they were preparing dinner. "At what? Motherhood?" "Yes, what if I don't have the instincts? What if the baby cries and I don't know what to do?" Mrs. Chen laughed, not unkindly. "Oh, honey, every new mother feels that way. You think I knew what I was doing when my first was born? I was 19 and terrified, but you figure it out. The baby teaches you what it needs, and you learn as you go." "But what if? Mrs. Chen pointed a wooden spoon at her. "You're borrowing trouble. That baby isn't here yet, and you're already worrying about problems that don't exist. Save your energy for the real challenges." Clara knew she was right, but the fear didn't go away. It sat in her chest like a weight, growing heavier as her due date approached. December arrived with a vengeance, blizzards and temperatures so cold that breath froze in your lungs. The school closed for 2 weeks, and everyone hunkered down to wait out the worst of it. Clara spent her days reading, knitting tiny clothes with Mrs. Chen's help, and trying not to think about going into labor during a snowstorm. Of course, that's exactly what happened. The contractions started on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before Christmas. Clara was sitting by the fire when the first one hit, a tightening across her belly that made her gasp. She waited, counting the minutes until the next one. 20 minutes, then 15, then 10. "Mrs. Chen," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "I think it's time." What followed was controlled chaos. Mrs. Chen took charge immediately, sending ranch hands to fetch the doctor from town and to make sure the road was clear. Silas turned pale and looked like he might pass out, which would have been funny if Clara wasn't in the middle of another contraction. "Don't you dare faint on me," she panted. "I need you here." I'm right here." But his hand in hers was shaking badly. The doctor arrived 3 hours later, by which point Clara was in active labor and reconsidering every decision that had led to this moment. The pain was unreal, waves of it that took her breath and made her scream despite her determination to stay quiet. "You're doing great," Silas said, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "I'm dying." "You're not dying." "I'm absolutely dying. This is how I die. Tell Diego he can have my books." Clara, and tell Anna she needs to keep practicing mathematics because she's brilliant and, oh no, here comes another one. She screamed through the contraction, squeezing Silas's hand so hard she felt something crack. He didn't even flinch. "Almost there," the doctor said from somewhere between her legs. "Next contraction, I need you to push." Clara pushed and pushed and pushed until she was sure she was being torn apart, until the pain became the entire universe and nothing else existed except the need to get this baby out. And then, suddenly, the pain stopped. Vanished so completely that Clara gasped with the relief of it. There was a moment of silence, terrible and complete, and her heart stopped. Then a cry. Thin and furious and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," the doctor said, and Clara started sobbing. Silas was crying too, she realized, tears streaming down his face as the doctor placed their daughter on Clara's chest. She was tiny and red and covered in vernix, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that suggested she'd have no trouble making herself heard. "She's beautiful," Silas whispered. "She's perfect." Clara touched the baby's tiny hand and watched in wonder as fingers curled around hers. "Look what we made." Silas kissed Clara's temple, then the baby's head, his hand shaking. "You did it. You're both here. You're both alive." Clara heard the relief in his voice. The terror that had been haunting him for months finally released. Their daughter squirmed and cried, completely unconcerned with the emotional devastation she'd caused her parents, and Clara laughed through her tears. "What should we name her?" she asked. Silas looked at his daughter for a long moment. Hope, he said finally, after what she represents. Clara thought about this child born in the middle of winter to parents who'd both been broken and rebuilt, about the school they'd built and the life they'd created and the future stretching ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility. Hope Maria Boone, she said softly, honoring the past while embracing the future. Silas's breath caught, and he nodded, unable to speak. They sat together, mother, father, and daughter, while the blizzard raged outside and warmth filled the room, and Clara thought, this is what I almost missed, this perfect, terrifying, wonderful moment. The baby, Hope, latched onto Nurse with surprising aggression, and Clara winced at the pain but also felt something settle deep in her chest. Maternal instinct, maybe, or just the knowledge that she'd do anything to protect this tiny person who'd just entered the world. You need to rest, the doctor said, packing up his supplies. You did good work, Mrs. Boone, but you lost some blood, so take it easy for the next few weeks. I will, Clara lied, knowing full well she'd be up and moving as soon as she physically could. She wasn't built for lying around. When the doctor left and Mrs. Chen had cleaned everything up, it was just the three of them. Silas sat on the bed beside Clara, one arm around her shoulders, both of them staring at their daughter with the kind of wonder usually reserved for miracles. I can't believe she's real, Clara whispered. I know. We made a whole person. We did. Are we going to be terrible at this? Probably. Silas kissed her temple. But we'll figure it out together. Hope made a small noise, somewhere between a grunt and a sigh, and both parents froze like she might explode. When she just settled back to sleep, they exhaled in unison. This is going to be interesting, Clara said. That's one word for it. But when Silas looked at her, Clara saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Peace, maybe, or just the absence of the fear that had been eating him alive for months. Their daughter was here healthy and whole, and they'd all survived. That night, with Hope sleeping in the cradle beside their bed and snow falling soft outside, Clara lay in Silas's arms and thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Starving and hopeless, teaching in a freezing schoolhouse, convinced she was going to die alone and forgotten. Now she was a wife, a mother, a teacher with her own school. She'd built a life she'd never imagined, with a man she'd never expected to love, in a place that had nearly killed her and then saved her instead. Thank you, she whispered to Silas, who she thought was asleep. For what? For seeing me when I was invisible, for refusing to let me disappear. His arms tightened around her. Thank you for staying, for fighting, for giving me a reason to hope again. Hope. The words seemed to echo, and Clara glanced at the cradle where their daughter slept, unaware that she'd been named for the thing her parents had almost lost and then found again in each other. The future stretched ahead, uncertain, challenging, full of all the difficulties that came with raising a child and running a ranch and maintaining a school. But Clara wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that was enough. Hope proved to be every bit as demanding as her lungs had promised. She woke every 2 hours through the night, screaming with an intensity that suggested she'd inherited both parents' stubborn streak. Clara stumbled through those first weeks in a fog of exhaustion, learning to nurse while half asleep, changing diapers by lamplight, and discovering that motherhood was less instinct and more desperate improvisation. She hates me, Clara said one morning after the fourth sleepless night in a row. She was sitting at the kitchen table with Hope screaming in her arms, tears streaming down both their faces. I can't get her to stop crying, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Mrs. Chen took the baby with practiced ease, bouncing her in a specific rhythm that Clara had tried and failed to replicate. Hope's cries softened to hiccups, then silence. She doesn't hate you. She's just new at being alive, and you're new at being a mother. You're both figuring it out. Mrs. Chen handed the baby back. Try holding her like this. See? Support her head, but not too tight. Babies can tell when you're tense. Clara adjusted her grip and felt Hope settle against her chest. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. How do you make it look so easy? 40 years of practice. You'll get there. Mrs. Chen poured her more coffee. And for what it's worth, you're doing better than most first-time mothers I've seen. At least you haven't tried to give her whiskey for the colic. People do that? You'd be surprised what people do when they're desperate for sleep. Silas was worse than useless those first weeks. He'd pace outside the bedroom at night, terrified to come in but unable to stay away. When he did hold Hope, he looked like he was handling explosives, careful and rigid, and clearly convinced he was going to break her. "She's not made of glass," Clara told him on the 5th day, watching him lower the baby into her cradle with the kind of caution usually reserved for defusing bombs. "She's so small. What if I drop her? Then she'll cry and we'll comfort her and she'll be fine. Babies are tougher than they look." But Clara understood his fear. She felt it too every time Hope's breathing seemed too shallow, every time she ate less than Clara thought she should, every time she cried for reasons Clara couldn't decipher. The weight of keeping another human alive was crushing in ways she hadn't anticipated. "I keep thinking about Maria," Silas admitted one night, after they'd finally gotten Hope down. He was standing by the cradle, watching their daughter sleep with an expression Clara couldn't read. About how she would have loved this, how she should have been the one. The words stung more than Clara wanted to admit. "I'm not her replacement." "I know that. Do you?" Clara sat up in bed, exhaustion making her sharp. "Because sometimes it feels like you're comparing me to a ghost. Like I'm supposed to fill a hole that has nothing to do with me." Silas turned to face her, and in the lamplight he looked older than his years. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I meant that Maria wanted this so badly it killed her, and here I am with everything she dreamed of, and I don't know how to reconcile that, how to be happy when she never got the chance." Clara felt her anger deflate. "You're allowed to be happy. She wouldn't have wanted you to spend the rest of your life mourning what she didn't get to have." "How do you know?" "Because I know what it's like to love someone enough to want them to be happy even after you're gone." Clara thought about Michael, about the complicated tangle of love and resentment she still carried. Michael wasn't a good husband in a lot of ways, but I'd like to think if he could see me now, he'd be glad I found someone who treats me better than he did. Silas crossed to the bed and sat beside her. "I do treat you well, don't I? Most of the time, except when you're being an overprotective mother hen about the baby." "I'm not—" He stopped at her look. "All right, maybe I am. A little. A lot. Yesterday you nearly tackled Diego because you thought he was holding her wrong. He was supporting her head at a weird angle. He was doing fine. You just can't stand not being in control." Clara softened her words with a kiss to his cheek. "But I understand why, and I'm trying to be patient. Just maybe try to trust that I can keep our daughter alive for 5 minutes without supervision." "I do trust you." "Then prove it. Go check the south pasture tomorrow like you've been putting off. I'll watch Hope, and we'll both be here when you get back." Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara could see the moment he decided to try. "All right. But if anything happens, nothing will happen, and if it does, I'll send someone to get you. Now sleep. We have maybe 2 hours before she wakes up again." They lay down together, Hope's soft breathing filling the room, and Clara felt Silas's hand find hers in the darkness. This was harder than she'd expected. The sleeplessness, the constant worry, the way a baby could consume your entire existence until you barely remembered who you'd been before. But it was also better in ways she couldn't articulate. Watching Silas fall in love with their daughter, seeing Hope's first real smile, knowing she'd created something that would outlast both of them. January brought bitter cold and the realization that Clara needed to return to teaching. Margaret was doing well with the students, but the school was Clara's vision, her passion, and she missed it in ways that made her feel guilty. What kind of mother wanted to leave her baby to teach other people's children? "A normal one," Mrs. Chen said when Clara confessed this. "You think every woman wants to spend every waking moment with an infant? Some do, sure, but some of us need more than that to feel like ourselves." "But Hope needs me. Hope needs you healthy and happy, which means you need to do work that makes you feel alive." Mrs. Chen took the baby so Clara could eat breakfast with both hands. "Besides, I'm here. And that girl Margaret is dying to get more baby time. Between all of us, this child will be so spoiled she won't know what to do with herself." Claire returned to teaching part-time when Hope was 6 weeks old, and the guilt nearly killed her the first day. She kept picturing her daughter crying for her, kept second-guessing her decision, kept wondering if she was being selfish. But then Diego asked her opinion on a college essay he was writing, and Anna showed her a mathematics problem she'd solved using a method they hadn't taught yet, and Clara felt something in her chest unfurl. This mattered too. These children mattered. She could be a mother and a teacher, could love her daughter and still need something beyond the four walls of her home. When she returned to the ranch that afternoon, she found Silas pacing the porch with Hope crying in his arms. "Thank God you're back. She's been screaming for an hour and I don't know what." Clara took the baby and immediately recognized the problem. "She's hungry. Did you try the bottles I left?" "She wouldn't take them, just kept crying, and I thought maybe she was sick, or she's fine, just stubborn, like her father." Clara settled into the rocking chair and began to nurse, and Hope latched on with aggressive relief. "How was your day?" Silas slumped against the porch rail, looking exhausted. "Long, terrifying. I have no idea how you do this every day. Practice. An acceptance that sometimes babies cry, and there's nothing you can do but wait it out." Clara watched him with amusement. The great Silas Boone, defeated by an 8-pound infant. "She's stronger than she looks. Again, like her father." That got a tired smile out of him. "How was teaching?" "Good. Really good, actually. I missed it more than I thought." Clara looked down at Hope, who was eating with single-minded focus. "Is that terrible? That I missed teaching?" "No, it's human." Silas sat beside her. "You're not just a mother, Clara. You're a teacher, a wife, a builder of schools. Hope gets to benefit from all of that, not just the parts that involve changing her diapers." The words settled something in Clara's chest that had been unsettled since Hope's birth. She could be both. She didn't have to choose. February brought visitors. Judge Morrison and a delegation from the territorial government come to inspect the school and determine if it qualified for official funding. Clara spent a week preparing, making sure everything was perfect, coaching the students on how to present themselves. "Just be yourselves," she told them the morning of the inspection. "Show them what you've learned. Show them why this place matters." Diego stood and Clara saw the confidence that had bloomed in him over the past year. "Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Boone, you've taught us that we matter, that our dreams are worth pursuing. They'll see that." The inspection went better than Clara dared hope. Judge Morrison watched Diego present an analysis of territorial politics that would have impressed a college professor. He listened to Anna explain her mathematical process for calculating compound interest. He saw children from ranch families and town families learning together, proving that education could bridge divides. "Mrs. Boone," he said afterward, sitting in her classroom while students played outside, "I'm recommending full territorial funding for this school. What you've built here, it's exceptional." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You did the work. You and your husband saw a need and filled it." He paused. "Though I have to say, when I married you two last year, I had my doubts. Thought maybe Silas was being impulsive. Thought maybe you were just desperate. I'm glad to have been wrong." "So am I," Clara admitted. "Though there were moments I wondered if we'd both lost our minds. The best decisions usually feel that way." Judge Morrison stood. "I'll have the paperwork processed within the month. You'll receive funding for 2 full-time teachers, books, supplies, and building maintenance. Additionally, the territory wants to use this school as a model for other rural communities." After he left, Clara sat alone in her classroom and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing they'd succeeded. The school would continue, would grow, would outlast both her and Silas and become something bigger than either of them had imagined. When she returned home, she found Silas in the barn with Hope strapped to his chest in a sling Mrs. Chen had fashioned. He was talking to their daughter about horses while she gazed up at him with unfocused eyes. "You see that one? That's Thunder. He's mean as hell and twice as stubborn. Reminds me of your mother." "I heard that," Clara called, and Silas turned with a grin. "How'd it go?" "We got full funding. The school is officially recognized by the territory." Silas crossed to her and kissed her with Hope between them, the baby making small sounds of protest at being squished. "I knew you'd do it. We did it. None of this happens without you. I just paid for things. You believed in me when no one else did. That's worth more than money." Clara touched Hope's tiny hand. "And you're wearing our daughter while working. I think you're getting the hang of this father thing. She seems to like the horses. Stops crying when I bring her out here. Or she's terrified into silence. Either way, it works." They stood together in the barn, their daughter between them, and Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. She'd arrived in Red Hollow with nothing but grief and pride, had nearly died from stubbornness, had been saved by this difficult, complicated man who'd seen her when she was invisible. Now she had a family, a school, a purpose that extended beyond mere survival. She'd built a life worth living. March brought the first hints of spring, ice melting, early flowers pushing through snow, the kind of light that promised warmth even when the air was still cold. Clara stood on the school steps one morning, watching students arrive, and felt something shift. A year ago, she'd been teaching in a freezing one-room schoolhouse, starving and alone. Now she ran a territorial school with 2 teachers, 35 students, and a waiting list of families who wanted their children educated. A year ago, she'd been a widow who thought she'd never love again. Now she had a husband who challenged and supported her in equal measure, and a daughter who taught her that her heart was bigger than she'd known. "You look thoughtful," Margaret said, joining her on the steps. "Just remembering where I was last year at this time." "And where's that?" "Nearly dead in a schoolhouse with wolves at the door." Clara smiled at Margaret's shocked expression. "It's a long story. I'll tell you sometime." Inside, Diego was helping younger students with their reading. Anna was explaining fractions to a group of confused boys. Children who'd had no access to education a year ago were now thriving, learning, dreaming bigger than their circumstances. This was legacy. This was what mattered. That evening, Clara sat on the porch with Hope sleeping against her shoulder and Silas beside her, watching the sun set over the valley. The school stood silhouetted against the orange sky, solid and permanent. The ranch stretched around them, full of people and purpose and life. "Do you ever regret it?" Silas asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going back east?" Clara thought about Chicago, about the life she might have had if she'd returned after Michael died. No, not even for a moment. Even though it was hard? Especially because it was hard. Easy things don't change you. She looked at him. "Do you regret asking that starving widow to teach your ranch kids?" "Every day." Clara hit his arm and he laughed. "I'm joking. That was the smartest thing I ever did." He pulled her closer. "You terrified me, you know. Still do sometimes. You see through all my walls and you refuse to let me hide. Someone has to keep you honest. And someone has to keep you from working yourself to death in the name of education. We keep each other balanced." "Yeah, we do." Hope stirred and made a small sound of protest at being squished between them. Clara adjusted her position, and the baby settled back to sleep with the kind of trust that still amazed her. This tiny person who depended completely on them, who had no idea she'd been born to parents who were both broken and healing. "I want to expand the school," Clara said. "Add a 3rd teacher, maybe build a small dormitory for students who live too far to commute daily." "Of course you do." But Silas didn't sound annoyed, just resigned and fond. "How much is this going to cost me?" "I'll write grants to the territory. Find private donors. You won't have to pay for all of it. But I'll end up paying for most of it." "Probably." Claire kissed his cheek. "But think of it as an investment in the valley's future. I'm thinking of it as my wife being unable to leave well enough alone." Also accurate. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear. Spring was coming, bringing with it new possibilities and challenges. The school would grow. Hope would grow. Their life would continue evolving in ways they couldn't predict. But Clara wasn't afraid anymore. She'd learned that she was stronger than she'd known, that love could be rebuilt after loss, that purpose could be found in the most unexpected places. She'd learned that sometimes the worst moments of your life lead directly to the best ones, that starving in a schoolhouse could somehow result in building an empire of education, that marrying a near stranger out of desperation could turn into the deepest partnership she'd ever known. A year ago, she'd been dying. Now she was more alive than she'd ever been. "Thank you," she whispered to Silas, who was starting to doze beside her. "For what?" "For refusing to let me disappear quietly. For fighting for me even when I didn't think I was worth fighting for." Silas opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "You were always worth fighting for. You just couldn't see it yet. And now you're dangerous. Now you're a woman who knows her own worth and isn't afraid to demand it. Now you're changing this valley, whether it wants to be changed or not." He touched her face gently. "Now you're exactly who you were always meant to be." Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks. Happy ones this time, born from gratitude and joy and the overwhelming sense that she'd found her place in the world. Hope woke with a cry, demanding food and attention, and reminding them both that even profound moments get interrupted by practical needs. Clara stood to take her inside, and Silas followed, his hand warm on her back. They had a life to live, a daughter to raise, a school to run, a valley to change. And they would do it together, one imperfect day at a time, building something that would last long after they were gone. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The expansion plans consumed Clara through the spring. She wrote letters to territorial officials, drafted proposals for private donors, and spent hours sketching designs for the dormitory she envisioned. Silas watched her work with a mixture of pride and exasperation, occasionally reminding her that she also had a 6-month-old daughter who needed attention. "I'm perfectly capable of managing both," Clara said one evening, bouncing Hope on her hip while reviewing architectural drawings spread across the dining table. "You're capable of managing everything. That's the problem. You don't know when to stop," says the man who works 16-hour days during calving season. "That's different." "How?" Silas opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head with a reluctant smile. "Fine. You win. But if you exhaust yourself into another collapse, I'm burning all these papers and locking you in the bedroom." Romantic. Practical. But Clara knew he was right. She'd been pushing too hard, sleeping too little, trying to do everything at once. The difference now was that she had people who noticed, who cared, who wouldn't let her disappear into work until she broke. The breakthrough came in June, when a wealthy mining family from Helena offered to fund half the dormitory construction in exchange for guaranteed enrollment spots for their children. Clara wanted to refuse on principle. She didn't like the idea of selling access, but Silas pointed out the reality. If their money means 15 other kids get to attend who couldn't otherwise, isn't that worth it? It feels like compromise. It is compromise. That's how you build something that lasts. He leaned against the desk where she was working. "You can't save everyone, Clara. You can only save who you can save. And if that means making deals with rich folks who want their kids educated, then that's what you do." Clara hated that he was right. Hated the practicality of it, the way idealism had to bend to reality. But she signed the agreement anyway, because 30 children in school was better than 15, even if it meant swallowing her pride. Construction began in July, and with it came a problem Clara hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Patterson appeared at the ranch one afternoon with a group of town mothers, their faces set with the kind of determination that meant trouble. "Mrs. Boone, we need to discuss the school's enrollment policy." Clara, who'd been teaching Hope to sit up unassisted, stood slowly. "What about it?" "You're allowing ranch children and town children to mix, children from very different backgrounds, different moral standards." Mrs. Patterson's nose wrinkled. "It's inappropriate." "Inappropriate how?" "These ranch children, their parents aren't always married, Mrs. Boone. They don't attend church. They use language that town children shouldn't be exposed to." Clara felt anger rise hot and fast. "And what exactly do you suggest? That I create separate schools based on whose parents meet your approval?" "We're suggesting that you maintain standards, that you recognize some children come from better families than others." "Better?" Clara repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "You mean wealthier, whiter, more respectable by your narrow definition." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed. "I mean, families with values." "Diego's family has values. They work hard, they love their children, and they sacrifice so their kids can have opportunities they never had." Clara moved closer, and the women retreated slightly. "Anna's mother cleans houses 16 hours a day to put food on the table. Tommy's father breaks horses that could kill him any day. Don't you dare tell me those families have less value than yours." "This is exactly what we were afraid of," another woman said. "You've become too attached to these people. You can't see clearly anymore." "I see perfectly clearly. I see children who deserve education regardless of what their parents do for a living or where they worship." Clara's voice went cold. "And if you can't accept that, then your children aren't welcome at my school." The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Patterson looked like she'd been slapped. "You can't bar town children. I can bar children whose parents teach them that some lives matter less than others. That's not education, that's poison." Clara crossed her arms. "This school accepts any child willing to learn and any family willing to support that learning. If you can't abide by that, there's the door." The women left in a flurry of outraged whispers, and Clara stood there shaking with anger and adrenaline. Hope, sensing the tension, started to cry, and Clara picked her up with hands that trembled. "Did I just make a terrible mistake?" she asked Silas, who'd been watching from the doorway. "No. You made the only choice you could live with." He came closer. "But you just declared war on the town's most powerful families. This won't be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is." The fallout was immediate. 5 town families withdrew their children from the school. Mrs. Patterson started a petition to revoke the territorial funding. Rumors spread that Clara was teaching radical ideas, corrupting children with notions about equality that would destroy the social order. Clara weathered it with gritted teeth and stubbornness, refusing to back down. The ranch families rallied around her, and several town families quietly expressed support even if they didn't dare voice it publicly. But the division in Red Hollow deepened, and Clara watched the community split along lines she'd hoped to bridge. "Maybe I should have compromised," she said one night, exhausted and discouraged after another day of hostile stares in town. "No," Diego said from the doorway. Clara hadn't realized he was there. "You shouldn't have, because if you'd compromised, it would have told me and Anna and all the other ranch kids that we're worth less, that we should accept being treated as lesser." He came into the room, and Clara saw the young man he was becoming, confident, articulate, burning with purpose. "You taught me that education is power," he continued, "that I have as much right to dream as anyone born in a fancy house. If you'd let Mrs. Patterson separate us, you'd have been teaching the opposite, that some dreams matter more than others." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," Diego smiled. "Don't quit now, Mrs. Boone. We need you." She didn't quit. Instead, she fought harder. She wrote editorials for the territorial newspaper about equal access to education. She invited legislators to visit the school and see what integration could accomplish. She refused to let prejudice determine her students' futures. And slowly, painfully, things began to shift. 2 of the families who'd withdrawn their children came back, quietly acknowledging they'd overreacted. A neighboring valley requested advice on starting their own integrated school. Judge Morrison publicly praised the Red Hollow School as a model for the territory. It wasn't victory exactly, but it was progress. August brought Diego's acceptance letter to the University of Montana. He opened it in Clara's classroom, hands shaking, and when he read the words, his face transformed. "I got in," he whispered. "Full scholarship. I actually got in." The other students erupted in cheers, and Clara found herself crying again. These emotional outbursts were becoming embarrassing. But watching Diego hold that letter like it was made of gold, seeing the future open up for a boy who'd started the year thinking he'd spend his life breaking horses, was worth every tear. "I'm proud of you," she told him afterward. "You earned this. You made it possible. No, you did the work. I just gave you the tools." Diego looked at her seriously. "Mrs. Boone, I'm going to be the first in my family to go to college. Maybe the first Mexican kid from this valley to go at all. That matters. What you built here matters. Just promise me you'll come back sometimes. Tell the younger kids what's possible." "I promise." He hesitated. "And thank you for seeing me when I was trying real hard to be invisible." After he left, Clara sat in her classroom and thought about visibility. About how she'd once been invisible too, starving in a schoolhouse while the town looked away. About how Silas had refused to let her disappear. About how Diego had been hiding his intelligence behind a tough kid act until someone bothered to look closer. The world was full of people trying to disappear, convinced they didn't matter. Her job, her purpose, was to refuse to let them vanish, to insist they were worth seeing, worth teaching, worth believing in. September brought Hope's first birthday, and with it a celebration that encompassed the entire ranch and half the valley. Mrs. Chen baked a cake that could have fed 50 people. The ranch hands built toys and carved animals. Even some of the town families who'd opposed Clara showed up, ready to move past the conflict. Hope, unaware of the significance, smashed cake into her face with gleeful abandon and laughed at the chaos she'd created. Clara watched her daughter covered in frosting and thought about the terror of that birth, the fear that had consumed Silas, the way they'd both been certain something would go wrong. But Hope was here, healthy and loud and absolutely perfect in her imperfection, and they'd all survived. She's going to be trouble, Silas said, watching their daughter try to eat a wooden toy someone had given her. She already is. Takes after her mother and her father. Clara leaned against him. We make good trouble together. The best kind. That night, after the guests had left and Hope was asleep, Clara and Silas sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. The school stood dark against the sky, but Clara could see lamplight in some of the windows where Margaret was preparing tomorrow's lessons. The dormitory construction was nearly complete, ready to house students from distant ranches starting next month. Do you ever think about where we'd be if things had gone differently? Clara asked. If you hadn't shown up that day with the wolves? You'd be dead. I'd still be alone. Pretty simple math. I mean, really think about it. All the moments that had to align for us to end up here. Silas considered. I think about Maria sometimes, about how she'd have liked you, how different things might have been if she'd held on just a little longer, gotten the help she needed. Do you still love her? Yes, but differently now. Like I love a memory, not a person. He looked at Clara. I used to feel guilty about that, like I was betraying her by moving on. But I think she'd be glad I found you, glad I'm not spending my life locked in grief. Clara thought about Michael, about the complicated tangle of love and disappointment she'd carried. I don't think Michael would be glad. I think he'd be jealous and resentful, but that's not my problem anymore. No? No. I spent too long caring what dead men would think about my choices. Now I care what I think, what our daughter will think when she's old enough to understand. Clara touched her belly, where another child was beginning to grow. She'd only just confirmed it, hadn't told Silas yet. What our children will think. Silas went very still. Children? I'm pregnant again. About 2 months. He turned to stare at her, emotions flickering across his face too fast to name. Fear was there. Clara saw it clearly, but so was joy. How do you feel about it? Terrified, excited, exhausted at the thought of going through it again. Clara took his hand. But ready. We know what we're doing now. We survived Hope's first year. We can do it again. I was terrified every single day of your first pregnancy. I know. You weren't subtle about it. Clara squeezed his hand. But you're less terrified now, aren't you? Now that you know we can do this? Silas pulled her close, and Clara felt him trembling slightly. Yeah, a little less terrified. Still scared, but... He pressed his face into her hair. But also happy. Is that allowed? It's required. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other under the stars, thinking about the family they were building and the future stretching ahead. Another baby meant more sleepless nights, more chaos, more love than Clara had thought her heart could hold. It meant Hope would be a big sister, would learn to share and care for someone smaller than herself. It meant their family would keep growing, expanding, becoming something neither of them had planned but both wanted desperately. Winter came early that year, and with it, Diego's departure for university. The whole school turned out to see him off, students and families alike gathering at the ranch to say goodbye to the boy who'd proved anything was possible. You write to me, Clara ordered, hugging him hard. Tell me everything you learn. And when you come back for visits, you teach the younger students. Show them the road ahead. I will. Diego pulled back and Clara saw tears in his eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Boone, for everything. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate widow who didn't know what she was doing. You always knew what you were doing. You just didn't know you knew. After he left, Clara stood watching his wagon disappear down the road and felt the weight of what they'd accomplished. One student accepted to university. 35 others learning and growing and dreaming bigger than their circumstances suggested they should. A school that would continue educating long after she was gone. This was legacy. Not perfect, not without struggle, but real and lasting. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, partly because Clara knew what to expect, and partly because she had help. Margaret took over more teaching duties. Mrs. Chen managed the household with practiced efficiency. Silas, having survived one pregnancy, was less prone to panic attacks every time Clara felt tired. But the fear was still there. Clara saw it in his eyes whenever she winced or moved wrong. The ghost of Maria and their lost child hadn't disappeared, just receded into background shadows that occasionally moved closer. I'm fine, Clara told him for the 100th time when he found her resting mid-afternoon. Just tired. Pregnancy is exhausting. You said that last time right before you collapsed. And I learned my lesson. I'm resting, aren't I? She patted the couch beside her. Sit with me. Hope's napping, the house is quiet, and you look like you haven't stopped moving in days. Silas sat, and Clara could feel the tension in him. What if something goes wrong? Then we handle it. Together. Clara took his hand. But Silas, you can't spend every pregnancy waiting for disaster. That's not living. That's just surviving. I know. I'm trying. I know you are. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And I love you for it. But you have to trust that we're going to be okay. That I'm stronger than Maria was. That our circumstances are different. That lightning doesn't strike twice. Sometimes it does. And sometimes it doesn't. You can't protect me from everything. All you can do is be here, present, not trapped in past grief. Clara tilted her face up to look at him. Can you do that? Can you be here with me instead of there with her? Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, jaw tight with effort. Yeah, I can try. It was enough. Not perfect, but enough. Spring arrived with mud and melting snow and the kind of light that made everything look new. Clara was 7 months pregnant and enormous, teaching from a chair because standing made her back ache. Hope was walking now, getting into everything, and Clara spent half her time chasing a toddler who'd inherited both parents' stubbornness. The school had 53 students enrolled for the coming fall term, with a waiting list. The dormitory was full, housing children from ranches 50 miles away. Margaret had hired a third teacher, a young man from Illinois who wanted to make a difference in the West. Clara watched it all unfold and felt satisfaction so deep it was almost painful. This was what she'd dreamed of that first winter when she'd nearly died. Not just survival, but purpose. Not just existing, but building something that mattered. You're thinking too hard again, Silas said, finding her on the porch after dinner. Just taking inventory. Of what? Everything we've built. Everything we survived to get here. Clara looked at the valley spread before them, golden in the evening light. A year and a half ago, I was starving in a schoolhouse. Now I'm running a territorial school, raising a daughter, pregnant with another child, married to a man I love. It doesn't seem real sometimes. It's real. You made it real. We made it real. Don't pretend you weren't equally responsible. Clara smiled at him. The great Silas Boone, brought low by a stubborn widow. Best thing that ever happened to me. Me too. The second baby, a son they named James, after Clara's father in a gesture of reconciliation with a past she'd never resolved, arrived on a warm May evening with significantly less drama than Hope's birth. He came fast, barely giving Clara time to panic, and emerged screaming with the kind of lung power that suggested he'd be as demanding as his sister. Silas cried again, but this time with joy instead of relief. No ghosts haunted this birth, no fears of history repeating. Just a healthy baby, a wife who survived, and the knowledge that their family was growing exactly as it should. Hope, 15 months old and deeply unimpressed with this new competition for attention, tried to push James off Clara's lap the first time she saw him. Gentle, Clara said, redirecting tiny hands. This is your brother. You have to be kind to him. No, Hope said, which had become her favorite word. Yes, he's family. No. Clara looked at Silas helplessly, and he was laughing so hard he could barely stand. This is your fault, she said. She gets this stubbornness from you. From me? You're the one who nearly starved to death rather than ask for help. That was pride, not stubbornness. What's the difference? I don't know anymore. They settled into a new rhythm. 2 children instead of 1, twice the chaos, twice the exhaustion, twice the love. James was an easier baby than Hope had been, content to sleep for hours at a time and eat without drama. Hope remained demanding and difficult and absolutely certain the world revolved around her. She's going to be trouble when she's older, Mrs. Chen predicted, watching Hope refuse to eat vegetables with the kind of determination usually reserved for military campaigns. She's already trouble, Claire said. I mean real trouble. The kind that breaks hearts and rules and anything else that gets in her way. Clara looked at her daughter, fierce and stubborn and already showing signs of intelligence that would make her dangerous, and felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. Good. The world needs more women who refuse to be manageable. You would say that? I raised myself that way. I'll raise her the same. Summer brought the school's official recognition as a model institution, with delegations from 3 other territories visiting to observe their methods. Clara gave tours while heavily pregnant. She refused to sit out just because she was growing another human, and watched educators from across the West take notes on integration, on teaching methods, on her philosophy that every child deserved access to knowledge regardless of their family's circumstances. You're changing education in this territory, one visiting superintendent told her. This school will influence policy for decades. Clara, bouncing James on her hip while Hope clung to her skirts, felt the weight of that responsibility and the satisfaction of knowing she'd built something that would outlast her. 1 year turned into 2, then 3. The school kept growing. Hope started attending classes, proving to be as brilliant and difficult as Clara had feared. James grew into a quiet, thoughtful child who preferred books to people. Clara taught, wrote curriculum, trained new teachers, and slowly transformed education in Montana Territory. Silas ran his ranch with the kind of practical competence that made it prosper. But Clara noticed him spending more time with the school, more invested in the students' success. He'd found his own purpose in building something beyond just cattle and profit. I never thought I'd care this much about education, he admitted one evening. They were attending a graduation ceremony for the school's first class of 8th graders, 12 students who would go on to high school, some to university, all of them carrying knowledge and opportunity they wouldn't have had without this place. You care because you see what it does, Clara said, how it changes lives, gives people choices. Or because my wife infected me with her idealism. That too. They watched the graduates receive their certificates, and Clara saw Diego in the audience, home from university for the summer, already planning to become a teacher himself. Saw Anna preparing to test for a position at a bank in Helena. Saw a dozen other stories of children who'd been given a chance and seized it with both hands. We did something good here, Silas said quietly. We did. Think it'll last? Clara thought about legacy, about the permanence of ideas versus institutions. I think the building will last. The programs might change, but the idea that every child deserves education, that background doesn't determine destiny, that will last as long as people remember why we built this place. To save you from starving to death in a schoolhouse? To prove that desperate circumstances can lead to extraordinary things. That people written off as unimportant can build empires of meaning. Clara leaned against him. That love and purpose can be rebuilt after loss. That's a lot of weight for one school to carry. Good thing we built it strong. The years continued. Hope grew into exactly the kind of trouble Mrs. Chen had predicted. Brilliant, argumentative, determined to challenge every rule and assumption. James became a quiet scholar, losing himself in books while his sister set fire to everything else. Clara taught, wrote, advocated for education reform, and slowly watched Red Hollow transform from a divided town into something approaching community. Not perfect. Never perfect. Mrs. Patterson remained opposed to integration until the day she died, and others carried that prejudice forward. But progress happened anyway, in small victories and quiet changes, in children who grew up believing they mattered regardless of their parents' status. Silas aged into silver-haired respectability, his hard edges softened by fatherhood but never entirely gone. He still worked too hard, still struggled with control, but Clara had learned to live with those flaws, the same way he'd learned to live with her stubbornness and relentless drive. They fought, they made up, they raised children and ran a school and managed a ranch, and somehow made it all work through sheer determination and love that had been forged in desperation, but had grown into something unbreakable. And when Clara stood at the school's 10th anniversary celebration, older now, grayer, with 2 children and a third on the way because apparently she and Silas had never learned when to stop, she looked at what they'd built and felt peace. Not the false peace of a life without struggle, but the hard-earned peace of knowing she'd made a difference, that her life had mattered, that the girl who'd nearly disappeared in a frozen schoolhouse had instead built something that would outlast her by generations. You did it, Silas said, joining her at the edge of the celebration. Everything you dreamed of. We did it, Clara corrected. None of this happens without you. I just provided the money and the land. You provided the belief. The faith that I was worth investing in when I was just a starving widow with impossible dreams. Clara took his hand. You saved my life, Silas. Not just that day with the wolves, but every day after when you refused to let me settle for less than I was capable of. You saved mine too. I was dead inside when you showed up, just going through motions, waiting for the guilt to kill me. You made me want to live again. They stood together watching their students celebrate, their children run wild, their community gather in a space they'd created from nothing but need and determination. And Clara thought about all the moments that had led here, the hunger, the fear, the desperate bargain, the unlikely love that had grown from survival into partnership. She thought about Maria, whose ghost had finally receded into memory without pain, about Michael, whose mistakes she'd long since forgiven, about her father, who'd died without understanding the daughter who'd left Chicago to build a life he couldn't imagine. She thought about all the people she'd been, the idealistic girl from Chicago, the grieving widow, the starving teacher, the desperate woman who'd accepted help from a stranger because pride couldn't fill an empty stomach. And she thought about who she'd become, a teacher who'd changed education in Montana Territory, a mother raising children to believe anything was possible, a wife partnered with a man who'd learned to love again, despite every reason not to. The past didn't disappear, the scars didn't fade, but they'd built something beautiful anyway, on a foundation of shared brokenness and stubborn hope. That was the truth Clara had learned in the hardest way possible, that you didn't have to be perfect to build something that mattered, that broken people could create whole things, that the worst moments of your life could become the foundation for the best ones if you refused to let them destroy you. As the sun set over Red Hollow, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Clara leaned against the man who'd saved her life and squeezed his hand. Their children shrieked with laughter in the yard. Their students celebrated futures they'd earned. Their school stood solid against the mountains, a testament to what could be built from nothing but need and determination. Thank you, she said again, because the words never quite felt like enough. For what? For seeing me when I was invisible. For refusing to look away. Silas pulled her close, and Clara felt his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. Thank you for letting me, for staying when you could have left, for building this with me. They'd started with a brutal winter and a desperate bargain. They'd built a school, a family, a legacy that would outlast them both. And if that wasn't enough reason to believe in second chances, Clara didn't know what was. The bell they'd installed above the school door rang out across the valley. Hope, probably, causing mischief as usual. And the sound echoed off the mountains, carrying across land that had once nearly killed Clara and had instead given her everything worth living for. This was the ending and the beginning both. The conclusion of who she'd been and the continuation of who she'd become. And as stars began to appear above Red Hollow, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the story they'd written together was exactly the one they were always meant to live.